I remember it well. I was a young boy, hanging out at a friend's house, when I saw it there. Sitting on his shelf was an image that is now seared into my brain. The cover art of a DVD sleeve for the Sonic the Hedgehog box set. I remember the thought I had as I looked at it and soaked it all in. Hey, is that girl naked? I receive a message from a stranger named Ian. They ask me if I want to be part of a retrospective they're working on about the Archie Sonic comics. Outside of him sending me random screenshots and brief interactions, I know nothing about this comic, but it sounds interesting. I tell him that I'll need to read the comic myself first, though that will take some time. He says that he's perfectly fine with waiting. Time passes, and this event moves to the back of my mind. I receive another message from Ian. It's been years, but once I see his name, I remember. This is that Sonic guy, the one where plans never came to fruition. He asks if I'm still up for it. And I say yes, which is really odd. Sonic stories have never been the thing that draws me to this franchise. Growing up, the gameplay was what captivated me, and that's remained Sonic's main appeal ever since, which is why I didn't even make a passing mention of the stories in any of my prior Sonic videos. For better or worse, they just aren't something that's ever been on my radar, at least as far as seriously considering and critiquing them is concerned. Besides that, there's the fact that the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic is big, like really big. Running from 1992 to 2017, it's well over 500 issues long with loads of spin-offs and side stories to call its own. And I've got videos to make and cats to feed, so this big commitment, this thing that I'd be chipping away at for a long time, it was quite the project to agree to. And yet, I still told the stranger that I'd do it. After all, he'd waited 3 years for me to read this thing. He even provided a comprehensive reading guide, link in the description. And if there's one thing I'm not, it's wise with my decision making. So I was in. Now, the Archie Sonic comics aren't exactly unknown, of course, but looking into things a bit more, I found the wider discussion of the series to be somewhat strange. Mostly, it's been reduced to a meme footnote in Sonic history. At first glance, that makes sense. A lot of weird stuff happens in these comics, but the further I read and the more of this story I experienced, the more I realized that I couldn't pull myself away. By the time I finished making my way through, I'd found a story with a unique appeal that I've never seen anyone else truly dive into. Naturally, that means that I had to talk about it. You people need to know. So join me through part 1, which will cover over 100 issues as I tell the tale of the Sonic comic that I loved, that I hated, that at times left me speechless. I hope you'll stick with me till the end. Trust me, it'll be quite the journey. So without further ado, let's juice and jam.
I got one more thing to do. Meet you guys at the usual. Got it, juice?
The Sonic the Hedgehog 1993 cartoon aired at a common time for children to watch their tunes, Saturday morning, and it's due to that simple fact that fans have come to refer to it as Sonic Sat AM. Many remember it fondly for its more serious tone. I mean, in the first episode, this old member of the Freedom Fighters just seems to die because the others couldn't save him in time. So yeah, serious, especially when compared to its much sillier sibling, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. That's where those Sonic Says PSAs come from, so that should give you a pretty good idea of what the show's kinda like.
I'm scared, Sonic. I know I should have obeyed that no flying sign. What's the judge gonna do to me? No flying for a whole month.
Look at the bright side, Tails. It could have been worse.
Anyway, these two shows started running around the same time. So when Sonic decided to branch out and make a comic book series with the Archie comics, they had two wildly different interpretations to base their series on. So, which did they choose? Well, the lush world of Mobius has been ravaged by Dr. Robotnik. Nothing will stop him in his quest to destroy the environment and turn all of its animal inhabitants into mindless machines through the roboticizer. But there is one obstacle in his path: the Freedom Fighters. This brave group consists of none other than the hero himself, Sonic the Hedgehog, along with his baby bro sidekick, Tails the Fox. However, there are many more who join him. There's Bunnie Rabbit, a half-roboticized rabbit with a southern accent. Antoine, a cowardly coyote with a French accent. This guy, a walrus mechanic who helps keep things running. Nicole, an artificial intelligence who provides the group with her hacking prowess and access to near limitless information. And of course, there's Princess Sally Acorn, the leader of the Freedom Fighters and a character who was meant to spark something in young boys and definitely spark something in Sonic the Hedgehog. Or as Sally sometimes refers to him, Sonic Hedgehog. Like Hedgehog is his last name or something. Wait, it is? So yeah, the Archie Sonic comic allowed kids to spend more time with their favorite Saturday morning rebels in their seemingly endless battle with the terrifying and tyrannical Dr. Robotnik. Oh, and Snively, of course. And Scratch. And Grounder. Coconuts. Oh, and of course the comic's #1 fan, Crabmeat, who buys all the collector's editions. And we can't forget about the Universalamander, who was so powerful that he could go toe-to-toe with Super Sonic. And then there was that time that Sonic battled the Spawn Mower and King Gong and Steve Urkel. That's right, they decided to go with adapting both cartoons, combining SatAM's depressing premise with a comedic tone akin to the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. So, Dr. Robotnik may still be trying to kill Sonic and his friends, but the ways he goes about that are now as ridiculous as they are brutal. We have a forest-destroying robot plant that's defeated with bad weather, Bunnie being manhandled by a couple of Yankees and getting half roboticized in a bot on the spot. Robotnik and this guy having an increasingly ridiculous disguise-based face-off in order to retrieve the bomb, which turns out to be a bug bomb, bad versions of our heroes from an alternate dimension terrorizing the townsfolk. Run, Turtle, run! A routine landline check leading to finding an underground society of nerdy creatures aptly named Nerbs. Robotnik crashing Sonic and Sally's wedding, which turns out to be a sting operation. Sonic meeting a frog who gives him magic stones that grants him powers like super strength, allowing him to save his friends with a giant fly swatter, and you get the picture. The comic nails this weird combination of serious and silly, almost like I'm reading a post-apocalyptic Sonic slice-of-life comedy. And I quickly found myself having more fun with it than I'd expected. Because even if every idea doesn't land, it's hard to get bored when there's always something new right around the corner. Plus, most of these early issues have 3 or more separate stories, which keeps things snappy, along with a bunch of single-page gags and a variety of jokes. For one, there are plenty of slapstick shenanigans if you're into that type of thing. Then there are surprisingly funny editor's notes that pop up from time to time. Loads of ridiculous references ranging from the Termite-nator to Botman to the Ghost of Christmas Fast to El Capone and the Master of Finjitsu. And I do really appreciate with these that the comic never wholesale references other franchises without having some kind of spin on it. Hey, Sonic! Did you just lie to me, you filthy blue rat? Then there are the puns. Most of these are downright painful in the best way possible. I mean, of course Bunnie wants to be a hairdresser. Of course these interdimensional weirdos are named Vertical and Horizontal. Of course there's an alien named Karhim of Wheat. Of course there's the parasites and antibodies inside the sick guy. Of course the baby deer turned out to be a bombardier. And of course, Sonic stops the story to list off tree puns. Heck, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that you could leaf through countless comic books and never find a better treatment of tree puns. Oh yeah, and the Cold War is over. Wait a minute. Sometimes the humor simply comes from appreciating the comic's commitment to a bit. Take The Man from Hedgehog from the main series' 16th issue. Robotnik spends this whole story desperately trying to figure out who is in charge of the Acorn Kingdom's secret intelligence. He interrogates a mole, his minions find a mysterious note, and his plans are thwarted again and again until finally, Sonic is saved from certain doom by who else than who? Yeah, this whole thing is a joke about Robotnik asking who it is that's stopping his plans, only to get confused because who is the one who's stopping him. I also think it's just an elaborate way to get to this final joke about how long it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, which... Who? I need you to tell me. I need to know. Wait. What about you? Yeah, you tell me. By the way, this comic really loves breaking the fourth wall, and sometimes it gives us great examples of this comic's commitment to stupid bits.
I crisscrossed the Great Forest at super speed until I spotted Antoine and easily duped him into revealing the entrance. Give me a break, it was dark, he was drawn in silhouette!
Now Antoine blames our artist? What's next? The comic takes a jab at how Sally's fur was miscolored in the original miniseries. Sonic frequently addresses the reader. He'll complain that he isn't the central focus of a story, or tell kids to pull out their Sega Genesis and help him on his journey to the next page. In this way, the comic often embraces its status not only as a product for children, but as a spin-off to the far more popular games, frequently adding new game characters into the mix and creating one-shots to promote any new Sonic adventures. Though I could definitely see myself finding this sort of thing cynical or cloying, I don't know. It wears its identity as a side product to a video game on its sleeve without any reservation, and with a very endearing tongue-in-cheek attitude about it. It's simply so direct with the reader. And to top it all off, each of these tie-in stories and characters are almost always directly integrated into the premise of the comic or its original cast. So it's combining everything a Sonic fan at the time could have loved about the Blue Blur and giving them what they want, to spend more time with Sonic and his friends and foes. In this way, the comic really just feels like it's excited to be a Sonic comic, and to celebrate that with the kids reading it. But what really sells this are the loads of fan interaction. As early as the first issue in the main series, the writers are answering kids' questions about Sonic the Hedgehog or giving out chili dog recipes. But these aren't simply relegated to the back corner of the comic. No. The writers often answer fan questions as Sonic himself. This results in certain interactions that are nothing short of magical. The best of which has gotta be Tammy. Yeah, that's right. I'm a big Tammy fan. You aren't? Well, don't worry. You will be.
Dear Sonogram Associates, in issue number 11, you said that Dr. Robotnik is obsessed with robots. Well, I'm obsessed with him. I have a bad case of puppy love for the evil but lovable megalomaniac. What is his first name and how old is he? He's so handsome, and his smile makes my heart skip a beat. But I have one problem. What has happened to his personality on the Saturday morning show? I liked him better in the good old days, back when he was just starting out on his quest for world domination. Perhaps he just needs a date. I'm available. Please pass this information and the enclosed photo on to him. Do you think he'll be interested? Oh, one more thing. Is there any Robotnikgram service where I can write directly to my love?
Hey, listen, Tammy. Did that snake Dr. Ivo Robotnik roboticize your brain? He's a dirty, low-down, no-good, backbiting, evil blimp. How could you love him? Sorry, but it's my sworn duty to protect the innocent from old Baldy. No way I'm gonna fix you up with that tyrant. I'm spoken for, but I think the editor guys, Scott and Paul and Victor, at Archie Comics are single. So why don't you give them a call and stay away from that robo-dummy?
Well, they can't quite compare to Tammy. My other favorite bits of fan mail come when the writers create scenarios based off fan theories, like this one with various fan-made origin stories for Tails. Sometimes these furry fellas even ask kids to write in if they want to see more of certain characters. Again, it's just that extra little bit of focus on the fans that makes this feel like a real celebration. But the physical nature of the comic is part of that too. Like, there are these little mazes to guide Sonic through that you'd have to draw on, cool pinups to cut out of your comic with birthday cards and bumper stickers. You even get to cut out these robot pieces, choose Sonic's dialogue, and you can crush Robotnik with your finger. Yeah, take that, and that, and that. And dear Aurora, Tammy, I didn't see you there. Anyway, let's move on to writing my very own Sonic the Hedgehog story. That's right, folks. There's even a whole story where the word bubbles are left blank and you get to fill them in. The very best of these are going to be published in a later issue too. So, you know what that means.
So then I told her, you have to decide for yourself. Walk on your own. Move forward. You've got a good pair of legs, Sal. And she was like, Sonic, shut up.
Well, Sonic, the thing is that when you give people advice like that, it comes across really weird because you move really fast and some of us have...
Did you hear that, Crabme? It's my lucky day. Sonic the Hedgehog is about to be single.
Are they trying to catch crabs? Are they trying to catch my people?
Good, Sonic. Good. Now, come to Daddy. Wait, that came out wrong.
Oh, wow, Sonic. It's a fish. I caught one. I caught a big one. Are you proud of me finally?
Oh yeah, Tails. That's equivalent exchange for you. Eat that sucker.
Equivalent exchange? What are you talking about, Sonic?
Tails, I don't have a big enough word bubble. Holy guacamole. Is that equivalent exchange?
I think it is equivalent exchange. Oh, no.
Yes, it is I, equivalent exchange, and we are about to exchange numbers, Hedgehunk. My big boy is about to gobble you little boys up. That came out wrong. Oh, no.
Tails, I think that came out wrong. We should leave before this gets awkward.
I don't know, Sonic. I kind of do better in awkward situations. I think I'm already awkward, so...
Tails, your awkward mumbling is screwing me up. Shut the... Well, looks like you're all washed up. Robotnik.
Look out when he storms through, Sonic the Hedgehog. Don't doubt
Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic, he can really move. Sonic, he's got an attitude. Sonic, he's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive.
Oh boy, that was awesome. There's no way they aren't gonna include ours after. Wait, was that a blue blur I just saw?
Hello?
Fan mail Sonic. Is that you?
Hey, dude, Lowart, was it? Yeah, bud, I just wanted to let you know you're way past late. Like, by over a decade. 3 kids already won.
Oh, no, that can't be right. Well, did you at least read it, Fan mail Sonic?
Whoa, look at that time. Got a juice and loose.
He's so cool. But you know what? I should be happy for Calder, Bremen, and Kenny, because that's what made reading this feel special. The comic seemed so excited to have you as a fan that I couldn't help but become one. I mean, I wasn't that big of a Sonic guy going into this, but by the time I had made it through so many of these early issues, well, it starts to feel like being a Sonic fan must be pretty cool, or at least a lot of fun. Throughout all this, you can feel how much this team cared about making this a good product, how much they wanted to make kids laugh, how much they wanted to make themselves laugh. And they wanted this comic to be as fun as it could possibly be. And I think the best early example of that commitment to fun can be found here. This is Night of a Thousand Sonics, and it's as delightfully dumb as it looks. Here, many Sonics scattered across many dimensions must join forces against the nefarious Robotnik. Pretty much all the Sonics are references of some sort or another, which alone wouldn't mean much to me. But when there are so many of them, when a whole issue is built around embracing this concept, it adds a lot. The issue is just so much, I keep saying this word, but really, it's just so much fun. Our Robotnik joins forces to try to defeat this poser. The Sonics lose their color as they enter this weird interdimensional neutral zone while battling baddies who are still colored in. You can cut out and make your very own SWAT bot, and you better be using safety scissors for that, or I will call your parents. And eventually, every Sonic does a supersonic spin to fight Giant Borg and save the day. The comic is pretty dang good at this, taking a simple idea or gag that wouldn't usually do much for me on its own, and pushing it so far that I can't help but smile at the silly spectacle of it all. Speaking of which, throughout these early sections, the artists deserve a lot of credit for giving the comic this charm and comedy. The expressive faces, the dynamic, fast-paced action, the way they punctuate the humor. All in all, they really elevate the comic's material. At this early stage, there are 2 main artists to consider, Dave Manek and Art Mawhinney. Manek often stretches the designs and expressions of these critters to their cartoony extremes, while Mawhinney is usually more on model while still very expressive. Their styles mesh together really well, and it was often somewhat difficult for me to discern who was drawing what. This way, the comic manages to have a cohesive aesthetic, with these round, bubbly character designs that feel soft and inviting. Yet, simultaneously, the world's aesthetics and character designs usually manage to fit in with SatAM's, which isn't surprising considering that Mawhinney worked as a storyboard artist on SatAM itself. Again, I can imagine a kid reading this comic and being so excited to see entire stories with the exact same aesthetic as the show they love, making the connection between one and the other feel even more seamless. Like these really are lost episodes from the show. But I should also give some credit to Scott Shaw, another artist, who brought a ton of personalities to the original miniseries and set a great standard for the rest of this early comic, with lots of fun squash and stretch and these really expressive characters and poses. Then there's the writing. Now, I've already talked about the humor and the fun that injects into the comic, but what I haven't talked about much are the heroes of this story. Or should I say, hero? After all, this comic is called Sonic the Hedgehog, right? Sonic is his usual wisecracking, fun-loving, badnik-breaking self, a somewhat typical, impatient hero who, for better or worse, rushes headlong into danger and cares about his friends. And the writers really know how to get a ton of entertainment value out of these traits, along with an unexpected level of in-depth characterization. A good example of this would be issue 12's The Lynx is a Jinx. Here, Sonic is on one of his usual rescue runs through the forest to protect critters from Robotnik. However, this time he encounters an interesting fellow, Larry Lynx. And Larry has a problem, or perhaps it's more accurate to say that he is the problem. For whatever reason, bad luck follows him wherever he goes. So when the freedom fighters get injured because of his luck, Well, Sally and the rest of the gang are quick to tell him he needs to find somewhere else to live. But Sonic doesn't follow along with that. Nah, even though he just met the guy, he says, Sonic the Hedgehog never abandons his friends. What a cool dude. But this isn't inherently interesting to me for a hero. I'd hope at the bare minimum, Sonic would act this way. But here's where the fun begins. As Sonic looks for a place where Larry can stay, they run into the Freedom Fighters who have been captured by some SWAT bots. Sonic has an idea though. He tells Larry to go out right in front of the SWAT bots. Larry, the poor little guy, assumes this is Sonic abandoning him. After all, he just told Sonic that it was probably his bad luck that got his friends captured in the first place. But no, Sonic the Hedgehog never abandons a friend. Instead, he puts them in danger. Banking on Larry's bad luck ability working as well on enemies as it does on allies, which of course, it does. To top it off, Sonic's original goal was to try and get Larry some good luck to break his bad luck, and it seems like this mission's success has done just that. A roundabout and absolutely ridiculous way for Sonic to save the day and help Larry out. This is an example of what makes Sonic go from likable but basic to something a little more fun. He's got a cheeky edge to him, this willingness to just charge into danger to help others and save his friends. And he does that because he's so sure he can pull it off. Of course, this cockiness comes from the fact that he's incredibly clever and resourceful, like when Sonic saves Bunnie from this giant magnet by tricking Robotnik into expanding its area of effect and having him point it back at Robotropolis. Again, the sort of plan that doesn't come without its risks, but he's confident that he can manipulate the enemy, and he just goes for it. If anyone can think on their feet, it's Sonic. And finally, we've got issue 14's Tails' Taste of Power, and it serves as a really endearing showcase of Sonic's personality. This time, Tails eats a fruit from the Mobian Tree of Wisdom and becomes hyper-intelligent. With this newfound intellect, he's able to take down badniks by turning their own weapons against them. He builds a machine to help with housework, and his verbiage metamorphoses into a veritable inundation of palatial proportions. But with this intelligence comes confidence, and Tails takes off to subdue the Freedom Fighter's prime nemesis on his own. When he arrives though, the fruit's power wears off, and he's walked right into Robotnik's hands. However, after deciphering Tails' words, Sonic soon arrives. So how is he going to fight his way out of this one? Well, he won't. He can't. Tails is in Robotnik's clutches, but Sonic has another trick up his sleeve. See, earlier on, Smart Tails awarded himself with a medal, but Sonic takes that medal and tells Robotnik that it's actually an explosive, and that Tails simply got captured while trying to complete his mission to destroy Robotropolis. But now, if Robotnik doesn't let both him and Tails go, Sonic is gonna blow them all sky high. Even though Robotnik starts off convinced this is a lie, when it comes down to the wire, he panics and gives in. Through this, Sonic transforms this symbol of arrogance into a symbol of action. Despite Tails' mistake though, Sonic never lectures him. He understands that, most likely, he has already learned his lesson. At the end of the story, Tails, now his regular self, asks Sonic how he knew the plan would work. To which Sonic replies, "Robotnik's a coward, Tails. That's the kind of thing a leader has to know." Again, we're seeing Sonic's willingness to just charge in there and get things done even if he doesn't have a plan, and how his confidence, charisma, and creativity still leads to victory. Moments like this make Sonic such a likable hero. Watching his cockiness get under the skin of jerks like Robotnik always feels really satisfying, and his overall confidence is magnetic. First off, that's because the stuff he pulls off is actually pretty impressive, not to mention fun to watch, but more importantly, because it's almost always expressed alongside how understanding, brave, or kind he is. And it's just good for gags. Sonic's a hero who will, without hesitation, rescue his #1 pen pal no matter the danger, all while still having that little bit of edge and ego that makes him so much more entertaining. It all comes together to bring this scrappy freedom fighter to life, juicing it all while kicking some good old Robotnik. In the end, I gotta agree with the little guy. He's definitely way past cool.
Can't waste time being unconscious. Sally needs me. I'll pass out on my own time.
However, there is one character whose coolness may rival the Blue Blood, and who often brings out his ego more than any other at this point in the comic. That's right, it's the new porcupine on the block with the buff chest, Knuckles the Echidna. Sonic's interactions with Knuckles they're pretty great. As expected, Knuckles is introduced when Sonic and Tails arrive at Angel Island. He's been tricked into working with Dr. Robotnik, who told him that these two want to steal the island's Chaos Emerald power source. So he rolls out that unwelcome mat and eventually captures them. What these early interactions show us is that Knuckles is a real numbskull. He gets upset with Sonic and Tails for knowing secrets he told them, he resorts to basic bad-mouthing, and he's quick to make assumptions about who he should and shouldn't trust. However, he's ultimately a good guy who's firm but fair. So, despite believing that Sonic and Tails represent a major threat to this island, he gives them a second chance. If they'll get out of his place, he won't give them any more trouble. Of course, this causes a rift in his and Robotnik's relationship. Obviously, Robotnik didn't want him to just let them go, and Knuckles' response to this. It really illustrates what makes this early version of his character so fun.
Keep your shirt on, Doc. You take care of business while I give these guys the business.
His dialogue is rarely laugh out loud funny, but it's consistently goofy enough that I can't help but smile. Soon after, Knuckles realizes that the Chaos Emerald is missing, but this doesn't make sense. He's been monitoring Sonic and Tails, so the pieces immediately click into place. Knuckles realizes he's been duped and joins forces with Sonic and Tails to stop Robotnik. It's part of what makes him so lovable. After all, he might be naive and a bit stupid sometimes, but he's not an idiot. On occasion, he just lacks the basic experience necessary to make wise judgment calls. From here, Sonic and Tails aren't sure how they'll get home, but lo and behold, our buddy Knuckles gathered the pieces of their plane for them. So he's also a guy who will try to correct his mistakes and help others. All around, he's a lovable goofball with a strong sense of morality, even if he makes some iffy decisions from time to time. And these same elements of his personality are obvious in his subsequent appearances as well. For example, in the Sonic and Knuckles one-shot, Robotnik takes over Angel Island and makes it into a flying weapon. Needless to say, this poses a major problem for the Freedom Fighters, so Sonic and Tails return to the island to figure out what's going on. Knuckles, ever the professional at jumping to conclusions, thinks that they're part of the reason his home is a war zone right now. However, after a scuffle and a save from Tails, they manage to show him that the stars in the sky are all wrong. The island has moved without him noticing. Again, while Knuckles may be the type of guy who doesn't notice what's right in front of his face, he's also one who accepts these facts for what they are and is immediately willing to correct course. In fact, from here, Knuckles shows off his clever side. See, when he realizes that Robotnik has been siphoning energy from the Chaos Emerald, he quickly grabs it and breaks it. Robotnik, believing that the island will now crash in a knothole below, runs away, thinking he's victorious. However, Knuckles didn't really smash the emerald. Nah, he busted a fake he kept on him for this sort of occasion, so now he returns the real, undamaged emerald to its rightful place, and the island can soar back into the sky once more. So, when it comes to his job, Knuckles isn't just some dummy. He's capable of resourcefulness and intelligence. We even see him collecting more spare emeralds and helping this island's critters. So regardless of his flaws, he has this admirable sense of duty, and he puts in the work. At this point, Sonic even respects Knuckles enough to ask him to join the Freedom Fighters, but Knuckles rejects the offer. He has his own responsibilities. In following issues, Sonic's and Knuckles' rivalry becomes really funny. These two will lock eyes from across the room and just start going at each other for no real reason. And if there's trouble, must be the other guy's fault. But somehow, this isn't obnoxious. No, their dialogue is consistently silly and snappy enough to totally undercut that potential element to this. And it's just funny watching their source of conflict go from Knuckles being paranoid of Sonic to Sonic being paranoid of Knuckles. By this point, they have what feels like a bickering brothers dynamic, constantly trying to one-up each other and ready at any moment to butt heads, all while still having an underlying respect for the other person. Which leads us to the Super Sonic vs. Hyper Knuckles special, a story that feels like the epitome of an issue where by its end, the characters have completely lost the plot. But while I genuinely don't know why these two are fighting like crazy, I can still somehow feel how much they know that they must. And that chaotic, colorful, and uncalled for dimensional carnage is what I'm here for. You want to talk about bickering brothers? This 2-page spread depicts the clash of Super Sonic and Hyper Knuckles as they pull hair and wind up for a knuckle sandwich. These dumb, stupid children, I love them. I can use my whirling fists like wheels and my feet like feet. Overall, this special, and Sonic and Knuckles' relationship in general, is an absolute blast, displaying Sonic's ego at its funniest and Knuckles' earnest annoyance at its peak. Just a wonderful time all around, and a dynamic that only helps to make both these characters a great deal more fun than they'd otherwise be. Still, Sonic has plenty of other friends to talk about. Now, most of them start off pretty simple as these gags or comedic commentators, but as things continue, there's some good development to be had with these guys, and the writers showed that they aren't willing to let them stagnate. In many cases, this comes from simply acknowledging that once you strip back the goofiness and puns and the fourth wall breaking gags, this world is awful. Robotnik has taken almost everything from these critters, their family, friends, and homes. At the end of the day, this is a story about a small group of rebels fighting a near hopeless fight. And the comic starts to focus more on how these scrappy kids are going to overcome these impossible odds. Now, that's not to say that the comic is overly serious about that at the moment, but most issues are now becoming a mix of a serious story and an incredibly silly one. Recurring adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog characters like Scratch, Grounder, and Coconuts eventually disappear entirely. And more, the comic attempts to tell more grounded narratives that last an entire issue. Beyond leaning into that underlying darkness of the setting, what these stories often allow for are welcome moments of clarity. Moments that humanize these silly little guys and show that they are affected by what's going on around them. Like Sonic's attempts to de-roboticize his Uncle Chuck and Mutsky, along with the sadness he feels from their separation. Or this guy trying to rescue his family from Robotnik's mind control and having to leave them behind. Actually, one particularly good example of this kind of thing comes in issue 18, where Sally's teacher and mentor Jalila passes away. This character has shown up pretty much out of nowhere, but it still works for me because it feels like we're getting a peek behind the curtain of the seemingly silly lives of these characters. A sudden, oh wait, moment, as Sally sits alone, mourning her loss, and Sonic arrives. He sits with her, comforts her, saying, "Tonight is almost yesterday, Sally, and there are many more tomorrows ahead." It's a genuinely sweet moment that manages to not only show us a different side of these characters, but also make me go, wow, I might actually enjoy these two as a pair. In fact, Sonic and Sally have quite a few cute moments together sprinkled throughout, though they usually have a bit more of a comedically flirty tilt to them. Honestly, to me, the comic hasn't only carried over the good parts of Sonic and Sally's relationship from Sad AM, it's improved upon them. But speaking of that show, Antoine, oh boy, in the show, Antoine is just, he's the worst. And this isn't some hot take, a lot of people hated him, and those fans carried that hatred over to the comic.
We had a character, Antoine, from the Saturday AM series. And I cannot begin to tell you how much mail we got from readers saying they absolutely hated the character, they wanted us to kill him off, that sort of thing.
The reason why Antoine sucked is simple. He was an annoying coward with no redeeming traits, at least none that I can remember. He's consistently the butt of every joke, but it's still not satisfying to see him suffer. His scream, it should be used as a fire alarm in apartment complexes worldwide to ensure a swift and safe evacuation. He's the primary focus of some of the show's worst comedy episodes, and I could go on and on, but his existence only makes the show worse. So what did the comic do? Well, the writers seemed to realize that leaving him the way he was wouldn't work. They had to do something else, and they did. Now, at first, he's a lot like his show counterpart. Arrogant, but ultimately useless. However, at this stage, he never gets much focus. He's more off to the side, unexceptional, but unobtrusive. The lack of audible screaming also helps. Regardless though, when he is the butt of the joke, it's quick, snappy, and usually done in a manner that just plays up the way that he's out of his depth. Plus, the way the comic leans into his ego, it's actually really funny sometimes. But then, the 10th issue comes around. Here, Antoine takes his freedom-fighting friends on a ride in his hot air balloon. However, since he's somewhat ill-equipped for this adventure, some buzz bombers pop the balloon and it comes crashing down. Of course, the rest of the gang is frustrated with Antoine, since he was so confident in its usefulness in fighting Robotnik's forces. But Antoine's response to this is where things get interesting. Now, it might seem small at first, but he doesn't just brush this aside. He's genuinely upset and ashamed that he failed his teammates. He wants to prove to everyone that he isn't useless, and he is unwilling to give up on something he believes in. So yes, Antoine is sometimes stupid and overconfident, and he can have an inflated ego, but at the end of the day, he's willing to go out there, fight for his friends, and put himself on the line. And by learning from his mistakes, he ends up saving the freedom fighters single-handedly. He actually has a place and purpose on this team. Then there's issue 23 with the Volunteer. Here we begin by showing that yes, Antoine is still a scaredy cat who jumps at shadows on the walls. But then he goes outside and he sees a sad-looking Tails, who's upset that he lost Sonic's power ring because now he let the team down and he might get in trouble. Right away, this shows us that Tails doesn't just tolerate Antoine. He likes him at least enough that he'll talk to him about how he's feeling. And we soon see why, when Antoine quickly offers to retrieve the ring for Tails. But then Tails reveals where it is: Robotropolis, the heart of Robotnik's territory. Still, Antoine is unwilling to back down and says he's going to get it despite his clear discomfort. Now, Antoine doing this is undeniably stupid. He doesn't have the skill to survive alone in Robotnik's land, but it comes from a good place. He promised this kid he would help him, and no matter what, he's going to do it. This way, his one-sided rivalry with Sonic isn't just used to make him seem pathetic. It's used to push him to become braver and better, even if the steps he takes to get there are sometimes silly. From here, Tails excitedly tells Bunnie what Antoine is up to, and she vanishes. We cut to Antoine sneaking around Robotropolis, narrowly avoiding death and disaster through mere chance. Or so it seems. Because yep, Bunnie has been following him the whole way, protecting him from the shadows and making sure Antoine survives this mission. So now we're given more of a reason to like Bunnie as well. The moment she hears one of her teammates might be in danger, she rushes to help them and handily defeats Robotnik's baddies. But she still wants to let Antoine feel like a hero, so she lets him have his moment with Tails. But he tells Tails something key. "That was not brave. That was foolishness. Never do such a risk yourself, Tails." At first, it seems like Antoine might just be saying that because he's talking to a kid, with how he and Tails agree to keep this a secret. But then he turns to Bunnie and thanks her and gives her a smooch, saying that this will be their secret. So Antoine wasn't as clueless as he seemed. He knew that Bunnie saved him and that without her, he wouldn't have succeeded. And his ego isn't bruised by this. He's thankful that his friend was there for him and that he has a partner he knows he can trust in the future. Obviously, these are just two small stories, but they contextualize Antoine's actions in a way that make him far more likable and engaging even when he's just being used for gags. And honestly, even the original miniseries, which happened a good while before any of this stuff, establishes his positive traits pretty well, giving him some nice moments with Sonic and playing up his ego in a way that makes him look competent since it's to help Sally. Overall, Antoine stands as a prime example of how this comic can take the show's material and build something better without entirely changing what it is. What I mean is that Antoine is still Antoine, he's still a coward sometimes, and he still has a massive ego. The comic simply made it so that his cowardice was no longer his defining feature. If anything, his ego is now, and that ego compels him to fight despite his fear, and to help save his friends the best way he knows how. Then there's Bunnie. While her strength was her biggest contribution to the team in the original show, now she feels like an even bigger powerhouse, and she's given a few moments to show why she's a fan favorite. The sweet girl who can also kick your butt halfway across Texas is just a fun contrast. But now with this Antoine story, she has an added layer to her character. And then there's the little romance bubbling with her thinking Antoine is really brave and, yeah baby, I'm here for it. And that's not all they do with Bunnie. Now, later we get to this chapter where we see Bunnie's fear that her body will betray her and that she'll hurt her friends. Again, we're exploring other sides of these characters, digging into who they are, viewing them from multiple angles, and that's exactly what I want from a long-running, mostly episodic story like this. But this Antoine story's final main character is no slouch either, because Tails is great. The Michael Jordan of the Freedom Fighters, if you will. This little guy's got a lot going for him in these early issues. He's cute, lovable, eager to please, and genuinely hardworking, even if sometimes his ambition can get him into trouble. After all, even when he ate from the Mobian Tree of Wisdom, he still ended up needing to be rescued by Sonic. To Tails' dismay, this leads to him often being coddled by the rest of the Freedom Fighters. However, that doesn't mean that he's dead weight, and while his contributions are usually small or accidental, his dedication to the team always pays off in the long run, and his love and admiration for Sonic is incredibly endearing. Case in point, we have issue 20, where after a botched mission, Sonic turns invisible and everyone thinks he's dead. However, out of all the Freedom Fighters, Tails is the only one who refuses to believe it.
Dear Sonic, I know you're alive, so I left this note. We're on our way to Robotropolis to avenge your death. Your loyal pal, Tails. P.S. If you are dead, then pay no attention to this letter.
And hilariously, it's only because of this letter that Sonic is able to find and save his friends from Robotnik. So even if Tails isn't always directly useful, his loyalty to the group and his hero sure is. However, as time progresses, Tails starts to get some side stories all to himself, like when he saves the Sonic fan convention from Robotnik, defeats Pseudo-Sonic, or has his first encounter with Octobot. While these victories may be smaller in scale, they're his. More than most interpretations of the character, the comic really leans into Tails being a little kid, and it's the act of consistently watching him rise to the occasion and do his best that makes this version of his character so compelling. Just seeing that Tails really is becoming a hero, like Sonic. He's even got the witty one-liners down.
Work? Do I look like a slave?
Actually, you look like 5 slaves, but who's counting?
Wait, what? It also helps that Tails' desire to be treated like a grown-up results in some really wild stories. For example, in issue 28 and 29, Tails, on the hunt for adventure, arrives on this island where he falls in love with a red fox named Fiona. The two really hit it off, but then it's revealed that Fiona is actually one of Robotnik's bots. While Tails succeeds in escaping Robotnik's trap, you've gotta feel bad for the kid. After all, he would have been able to live it up with the perfect woman, if only she'd been waterproofed. Thus, Tails leaves the rusted husk of the robot love of his life behind, a monument to their brief yet incredibly formative encounter. Some say Robo-Fiona is still out there on that island, crying, alone, wishing that, in some other dimension and some other time, things could have been different. The Archie Sonic comic is truly a tragedy. From here, Tails continues his submarine journey. He meets the Down Under and 40 Fathoms freedom fighters, fights Octobot and Crocbot, recounts his adventures as Captain Super Foxman, the mutant cyborg clone, and finds out that he's the chosen one of destiny. But that's a tale for another time. Finally, he helps put an end to one of Robotnik's schemes. Tails was right, but only partially. He can do a lot to help, but he can't do it alone. He needs a team to be there with him if he's really gonna make a change in the world at large. It's a cute little arc for him, and one that endeared me to his character just a little more. But this expansion of the world and its characters doesn't stop there. Now, the comic's got plenty of its own ideas, and sometimes those ideas are, what is that thing? Well, that's an exceptionally versatile Evolvanoid. It was created from the DNA of Robotnik and Sonic, made by the Doctor with a single directive: destroy your father, aka Sonic the Hedgehog. However, over the course of a single issue, it transforms multiple times and ultimately achieves enlightenment, realizing that Robotnik is its true limitation and that he must be destroyed. So it fries Robotnik, then turns to Sonic, ready to destroy him too. But Sonic talks it down, saying that its real limitation is its programming, and it must go against that programming to truly break free from its restraints. This way it gains independent thought and evolves further, entering the endless expanse of space. It's a story that, by the end, feels pretty out there, but the following story takes this even further. Because, as it turns out, Robotnik wasn't murdered by E.V.E. Instead, he was sent to an alternate dimension where he meets Robo-Robotnik. No, not that one, this one. Robo-Robotnik was defeated by his Sonic, and in a last-ditch effort to preserve what was left, downloaded his robot soul into a satellite station he'd built. Unfortunately for him though, at the time, it was functionally useless. Now, Robo-Robotnik spends his days wallowing in space waiting for his inevitable power failure. However, our Robotnik won't have any of that, and encourages him to keep up the fight. The war isn't over for either of them. And as thanks for reinvigorating his cold, dead heart, Robo-Robotnik sends our Robotnik back home to the planet Mobius where everyone is gonna die, because Robotnik ensured that in the event of his demise, Operation Wasteland would commence, wherein his robot army would raze the land to ash and dirt. Because if Robotnik can't have this world, then no one can. Our heroes are so caught off guard that they don't even know what to do, until at the last minute they're saved by a familiar voice. Robotnik takes so much sick pleasure letting Sonic know how much the freedom fighters' lives are in his hands. And to rub it in, he lets them leave, stating that,
"Next time will be of my own choosing, Hedgehog, when you least expect it. There's been no gain, there's been no loss. We shall live to fight another day."
Speaking of the madman himself, Robotnik. When he's not being terrifying, he is hysterical. The deliciously evil dictator who hates laughing, singing, reading, animals, dancing, plants, religion, and even women. Everything about him is icky and gross in just the right way. I mean, my man drinks and sweats 10W40, even committing federal offenses such as stealing Sonic fan mail from the US Postal Service, a truly heinous crime. But hey, that's what makes him a supervillain on the cutting edge. And man, does he have fun being terrible. In fact, it sometimes makes it easy to forget just how horrible a person he really is. This stand-in for all things greedy and destructive, decimating the environment not only for his own gain, but because he enjoys watching others suffer. He's a villain who's an absolute joy to sit with, especially if, like me, you read his dialogue with his sad AM voice in mind.
Sonic the Hedgehog has been a thorn in my side, but girls just want to have fun.
Then there's the way he plays off other characters, his robots, and his poor nephew Snively. Man, he is such a monster to everyone, and I love him for it. His henchmen are just as fun, from his badniks who have a ton of personality to his SWAT bots that know that when Sonic is around, it's best to just call it quits and off yourself out of spite. It seems Robotnik requires all his henchmen to refer to him by over-the-top evil titles. And just seeing Robotnik rally his troops or have a company picnic is inherently funny. Snively is great too. His best outing for me is easily when he accidentally gains full control of Robotnik's forces when the big man is lost in the void. Suddenly, all of his bottled up ego is on full display as he starts wearing Robotnik's clothes and talking all high and mighty. It's really funny how bold he gets. Even better is the fact that while Snively shares his uncle's intellect, he is so incompetent and brash in his execution that he almost destroys the planet in a single day, with the freedom fighters deciding to set Robotnik free to reverse Snively's screw-up, since having to deal with a calculating dictator is better than dealing with a cataclysmic moron. The best part? Robotnik decides to spare Snively's life so that he can make him miserable for all that's left of it. Robotnik is really the glue that holds a lot of this early comic together. Like, yeah, I've highlighted a lot of fun issues and worthwhile stories, but honestly, there are a good number where the concepts or execution isn't bad, but it also isn't all that good. However, when you have Robotnik in there, well, for some reason, every writer and artist seems to have a unified understanding of what makes him fun to read. And as such, regardless of whatever else is going on, you can always count on Robotnik bringing the spice you need. He elevates the comic through and through. Much like Tammy, I've got to admit, I think I might be in love. Overall, I'm impressed by how this silly little comic treats all these characters with genuine weight and respect, when it could have easily left them as simple, static gags. Even more impressive is that it almost never uses that serious side of them to undermine the silly side, or vice versa. Instead, both of these tones are given room to breathe, creating characters more fully realized, engaging, and lovable than I ever expected them to be. However, as the world of Archie Sonic became more cohesive, the writers developed a greater interest in telling serious, long-running tales. But before it fully committed to that tone, there was a trilogy of issues that combined the best of both worlds, of the serious and the silly, to create a story that I love far more than any of the others I'd read so far. Let's start with what you've been looking at, the art. Man, the art in Mecha Madness is great. All these drawings were done by Patrick Spaziante, or Spaz for short. Now, this isn't Spaz's first issue on the series. He was the artist that brought the comic Sonic CD adaptation to life. He drew a bunch of really cool covers, and was more than half the reason the Eve storyline felt so otherworldly. Overall though, he still hasn't done nearly as many issues as Manic and Mawini. But when he's here, he brings a lot of his own style to the comic, while still retaining many of the other artist's strengths. Like, the characters remain incredibly expressive, with their facial expressions getting across a ton of personality, especially with Robotnik. However, he does have certain qualities that make his work stand out sometimes. The main thing being just how much is going on. At certain points, it can honestly get a bit overwhelming, but the vast majority of the time, it manages to be busy yet organized. His art, combined with the panel layouts, makes reading an absolute breeze. For an action-packed issue like this one, it's hard to overstate how much Spaz's work adds to the story. Really, Mecha Madness is a tour de force of Spaz's detailed, dynamic work on this comic. In particular, the fights here, Spaz nails these poses. Each punch has proper impact. Each page has something eye-catching. Overall, Spaz is a great addition to the art team of Archie Sonic, and will only continue to improve his craft and create some of the most dynamic and excellent pieces of Sonic artwork, despite his obvious and unfortunate biases.
And do you admit to draw Sonic more heroic than moi? Yes, it's all true. I confess, take me away.
But that's enough about the art. The writing is equally strong. See, this story was written by Mike Gallagher, who's been responsible for many of the series' goofier issues. But here, he shows off his ability to balance that silliness with some serious stakes for the characters. This story begins with Sonic telling the Freedom Fighters about his brilliant plan. He's going to get roboticized on purpose and use the neuro overrider that this guy invented to keep his free will. This should give him the extra bit of power they need to destroy Robotnik, and he can do it from the inside. Now, Sally was already purposely roboticized in a previous issue, and that plan went awry, so the others are all against another risky scheme. Of course, Sonic thinks that things will go different this time because it's him, but still, his plan is rejected, and he leaves annoyed. Right off the bat, what I like about this scene is how it fleshes out Sally. There's a real sense that she's tired of having these types of conversations with Sonic and constantly having to reel in his impulses. But more than that, she's offended by Antoine's total lack of faith in him, with Antoine suspecting that Sonic might go rogue and do his plan anyway. So while Sally may sometimes get fed up with Sonic's shenanigans, that doesn't mean that she forgets the relationship or all that Sonic's done for the team. And she's definitely still willing to stand up for him. This way, she isn't treated as a one-sided caricature, as Sonic's love interest or a single-minded leader. Instead, these two sides of her are balanced, and that serves to make her feel more real and respectable, creating a character who's far more engaging to me. From here, the plot kicks into gear as Sonic manages to get what he wants in the worst way possible, because Knack the Weasel kidnaps him and takes him to Robotnik. Soon enough, our hero emerges as none other than Mecha Sonic, and he's given the sole mission to destroy Knothole. An interesting thing to note here is that as a display of Mecha Sonic's strength, Robotnik has him destroy a gigantic form of crab meat. Prior to Snively, and even during his early days in the comic, Crab Meat was Robotnik's sidekick of sorts. But after this issue, he's completely retired from that position, and Robotnik never rebuilds him again. In retrospect, it's a cool way for the comic to inadvertently say, hey, things are about to change. And at first, it looks like they will for the worst, as our heroes seem to be no match for Mecha Sonic. But this is where one freedom fighter, Bunnie Rabbit, truly gets to shine, and I love how she's handled here. Before, we already knew that she was a powerhouse, but now that aspect of her character is cranked to 11, as she blasts Metal Sonic with lasers, flies through the sky, and uses her extendo legs to dodge his attacks. She just puts up a great fight, and does so well that Robotnik has to personally interfere to stop her, and even then she gets right back up and fights long enough to allow the team time to call for backup and evacuate Knothole. While she's not the main hero of the story, she still manages to help save the day, creating the most memorable and extreme moment for the character up until now, and solidifying her as an awesome inclusion to the cast. In the end though, she's still unable to defeat Mecha Sonic, leaving the group with one option. They can use their very same Portabot that roboticized Bunnie from all the way back in issue 3 to transform someone else into a mecha. The hope here being that they'll be able to retain their individual identity with the Overrider and defeat Mecha Sonic in the process. Understandably, many of the freedom fighters don't like this plan. It was a last resort after all, and as silly as this comic can be, here Gallagher clearly understands that it's important to show how these critters have been impacted by Robotnik's deeds. They have an extremely adverse reaction to anything related to robots, even if it could help save them. Still, Sally proves herself as a leader, making the tough decision to roboticize one of their own in order to save Knothole. Once again, it's great that we get to see more sides of her, this royal-born leader and this girl who wants to live a normal life, as she's capable of jumping in to whack some sense into Knuckles, but also gets lost in their conversations about times they spent together in their childhood. Speaking of which, yeah, Knuckles is the one who gets roboticized, and there's no better choice from a narrative perspective or from a pure entertainment value point of view. Now we don't just have another Sonic and Knuckles fight. They're in these robotic forms, flying in the sky, blasting lasers with their cool designs at the forefront of the action. Knuckles himself continues to be an absolute treat with how he shows no hesitation to be roboticized or his ridiculous one-liners. Like, to quote Knuckles, to paraphrase Hendrix, "Excuse me, while I diss this guy." Still, this action could feel a bit empty if Sonic's personality was entirely missing. After all, part of the fun of seeing these guys clash comes down to their interactions, and that's why it's great that here, Sonic starts fighting Robotnik's controls a bit. Even when he could have been reduced to nothing more than a piece of the plot, Gallagher finds a way to show his strength and heroism. He won't simply let himself be used by Robotnik. He will fight back, and in doing so, give Knuckles the upper hand he needs to stop him before it's too late. I mean, if he hadn't done that, Robotnik might have retrieved the coordinates to Knothole, and who knows what horrible things he would have done then. Oh yeah, and I also like how Sonic regains enough free will to let himself act as a cushion for Mecha Knuckles to crash into. Though of course, Mecha Knuckles also just wins because he's cool and because he wasn't roboticized in one of Robotnik's pesky newer roboticizers with their inferior foreign parts. After the battle is finished though, Sonic is barely hanging on to his life. Of course, Sally is sobbing. She thinks Sonic's gone, and here we get to see her genuine emotional reaction to that, all without undermining the fun of the story, as it's soon revealed that Sonic can be turned back to normal using the 1 billionth power ring he collected in a previous issue. Yet another fun little callback, and while it could feel cheap, the larger-than-life stakes and absurdity of this story allow me to accept a just as ridiculous solution fairly easily. After all, this arc is very silly with some laughably melodramatic dialogue throughout. Hearing Sonic lament about how he doesn't deserve to live for nearly killing his friends is as hilarious as it is heartbreaking. And honestly, I wouldn't change any of it. It's what makes this arc so entertaining. How all of its emotions are cranked up to the max. It's unhinged in all the right ways, bolstered by the just as over-the-top art. So I'm more than willing to let a couple contrivances slide. And so, with Sonic back to normal, all is well, and Mecha Madness comes to a close. Or it would if it wasn't for the fact that everyone thinks Sonic got roboticized on purpose, and his plans simply fell through. So these guys believe that he willingly put everyone's lives at risk. And who can blame them? He pushes for this roboticization plan, leaves, and comes back the same day as Mecha Sonic? Yeah, seems pretty clear to me. So this story isn't over yet, because now Sonic needs to go on trial. I really like what this does for some of these characters. Amy is absolutely adorable, standing outside the jail, picketing for Sonic's release and dunking on Antoine. Then there's Sally, and this is the perfect challenge for her. After all, what better way is there to encapsulate her struggle between her individual wants and her responsibilities as a leader than this? Than having to abide by her own rules and try Sonic for his crimes, even though she so clearly doesn't want to. Meanwhile, Antoine's hilarious in this issue. He's so excited to get Sonic in trouble for this. Now, this could easily make him annoying, but I think it only works in his favor here because he has every reason to believe Sonic did this, and Sonic has been a bully to him in the past. For Antoine, this is just Sonic getting what he deserves, and the way he goes about this, saying that he'll make it brief, but then going on and on and on. Man, there are some great jokes here, my favorite of which is here. My man is absolutely harassing this poor girl. Stop badgering the witness. Then there's Sonic. Gallagher absolutely nails his character. Where Antoine has this bloated, long-winded response, Sonic gets straight to the point, outlining all the reasons why they should believe him and explaining that it was Knack the Weasel who was responsible. And though he doesn't manage to convince everyone that he's innocent, Sally is willing to use her position to help him. She'll give him 24 hours to prove that this wasn't his fault. After that, though, well, it'll be out of her hands. Again, Sally may sometimes seem to be a hindrance to Sonic, but when push comes to shove, she's in his corner, and she'll do whatever she reasonably can to balance her affections for him and her duties as a leader. From here, the story becomes extremely straightforward, and that's because my boy Sonic becomes a force of nature. This man bulldozes his way into a bar, fights a bunch of old retired badniks, and not only tricks Knack into thinking he's been defeated, but then allows him to drive all the way to Robotropolis just so he can knock him out, call up Robotnik, and tell him that he's just sent a nice little exploding present to his doorstep, because screw you. Sonic apprehends the rat, throws him at the feet of the princess, and then reveals that he took apart his parole tracker to make a gas filter, providing a goofy explanation for how he wasn't knocked out. He breaks the very thing that was meant to prove his loyalty, so he can use it as a weapon to 100% clear his name. Really, it's just fun watching the hero have such a clear goal and executing it with perfect skill and focus. And it's a great continuation of the merging of wackiness and coolness that this comic promised us in Mecha Madness. In the end, while Sally is incredibly happy Sonic has cleared his name, she's still upset with herself for doubting him, and says that she'll make a public apology. But Sonic won't have it. There's no time for fanfare. He needs to get moving again. This is one of those moments that really sells them as a likable pair. As soon as she can be, Sally is fully on Sonic's side, ready to humble herself and maybe even undermine her position as leader to make things right. But Sonic doesn't just move fast, He forgives her fast, and he's willing to look past these issues because at the end of the day, he tries to understand what Sally is going through. All in all, this 3-issue story manages to perfectly blend the comedy of the comic with some higher stakes, cool character moments, and endlessly fun action. It's a blast from start to finish. And the perfect story to really show just how bonkers early Archie Sonic can be. Great job, Mr. Gallagher. In fact, great jobs are in order for all these writers. Angelo De Cesare for breathing new life into Antoine and establishing what will become one of my favorite couples. Rich Kozlowski for providing some nice extra depth to Bunnie. Kent Taylor and Paul Castiglia for some decent one-offs, and the dynamic duo of Mike Kantarovich and Ken Penders for introducing the multiverse, and so many other cool concepts into the comic for Sonic to play around with. As well as creating a wonderfully sweet moment for Sonic and Sally, and nailing a likable portrayal of Knuckles from the very start. And of course, a great job to all these writers for the many laughs. However, does this mean that you should run out to your local comic shop and grab these bad boys off the shelf? Well, no, you can't. They aren't on sale anymore, and they cost like $1 bajillion secondhand online. Trust me, I've looked. I want them. But besides that, even if I think they're minor, I do feel that this era has some small problems that anyone thinking about getting into the comic should be aware of. At the start, Sonic's ego and general characterization can be a bit too mean-spirited at times, usually towards Antoine. Then there's Rotor, who, wow, I kind of forgot about this guy. And that's not because he's awful or anything, he's just normal. Even in the stories focused on his personal struggles, he doesn't have much in the way of defining character traits or something for me to really latch onto. It's a problem some of the stories in this era have, where they'll prioritize a character's role in the plot over endearing me to them through their characterization, which can weaken a lot of the introductions of newer faces. And finally, almost every issue has some degree of characters narrating what's on the page, which I can already see, guys. But there's a reason I didn't pause to focus on this stuff earlier. These things really didn't bother me that much. Sonic being a bit off? Well, it's only for a few issues, and he quickly gets way better. Some characters I didn't care for, there are way more I like, and it's not like these unlikable members get that much time devoted to them. How about a somewhat boring plot every now and then with some weak dialogue sprinkled throughout? It's hard to get all that caught up on those when most of these stories are super snappy, so I always knew that there was another cool idea right around the corner. Basically, the baseline level of quality in this comic is consistently good enough that I'm more than willing to overlook its occasional small shortcomings. Because more than anything, this comic is fun. Really fun. With its fast-paced, colorful cast, varied humor, and delightfully absurd tone, it was consistently a fun addition to my week as I was reading through this era. And I was surprised that I was already starting to care about some of these characters, familiar or otherwise. Much like the Saturday morning cartoons of my childhood, this comic was my comfort food. But this wasn't the cheap stuff. Nah, we're eating that good sponsored cereal today, boys and girls. More importantly though, Mecha Madness and other stories like it made me realize something. If this series keeps going like this, if it keeps building off its crazy concepts in fun and creative ways, continues to be filled with this feeling of excitement as it tells more long-running tales, and more than anything else, keeps these lovable characters at the forefront, well, it could take that next step and turn into something truly great. So I was ready to keep on juicing and jamming for many issues to come.
Don't celebrate too soon, Hedgehog. Now, it's my turn.
What you just saw was the final scene of Sonic Sat AM. Though the story was left open for some sort of continuation, that would never come to fruition, at least not in any official capacity. For a time though, that wasn't entirely clear. I mean, there was always the possibility it could be renewed or come back after a couple years, and so the Archie Sonic comic trucked along, telling its own stories. However, according to writer Ken Penders, by the time the comic reached its 36th issue in May of 1996, Archie Comics editor Scott Fulop thought the comic wasn't long for this world. And I can see why. This comic, for all its own strengths, still had a ton of its identity rooted in that show. And with it gone, and its unique cast of characters going almost completely unused by Sega, what purpose did it serve anymore? The writing was on the wall. So, armed with this information, Penders began to develop the series finale. Because if the story was gonna end, it might as well have an actual ending, right? As such, from issue 37 onward, the comic quested toward that aptly titled Endgame, a 4-part finale that would cap off the story and give us the final showdown between Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Robotnik. But this wouldn't be like their previous fights. No, with the exception of a few silly stories, the issues post-Mecha Madness made their intentions clear. It was time to put those jokes aside, get serious, and march into war. Tyranny. Like a dark cloud, it shadows a land, causing the valiant to rebel, creating war. Its soldiers are often called freedom fighters, who are sometimes driven to desperate acts, even against those who have attempted neutrality. A position in war the fabled floating island has been unable to maintain as its natives look for hope from its guardian, the one being they depend on to protect them from the desperate acts of those in search of freedom and their war's invasion. Something Knuckles the Echidna never thought he would have to contend with from the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog. There are many problems with this section of Archie Sonic, but they all appear in the Endgame storyline. So we'll be using it to describe a bunch of the ways the comic has broken down since Mecha Madness, along with addressing a few extra problems with the comic that sure had always been there, but it hadn't become major until now. Let's just start with the prologue to Endgame, issue 46. Here, our heroes are gathered around the campfire, meeting with allies both old and new. And this meeting exists to get the reader to ask one key question. Is there a traitor among the freedom fighters? Everything that happens in the story is in service of that, with everyone pointing fingers and yelling and getting real ticked off. So this conflict is obviously about the characters, about their worries, fears, weaknesses, and you get the picture. The story itself, however, doesn't end with us finding out who the supposed traitor is. Instead, this is used as a framing device to show how our heroes act when put under such intense pressure, which unfortunately reveals just how much one particular character has degraded over the course of the comic's run, to the point where now a disgusting stench follows her wherever she goes. Now, despite how much praise I gave her in Mecha Madness, I've had mostly mixed feelings on Sally for a lot of the comic. For example, in that Larry Link story we talked about earlier, Sally is so quick to leave this guy behind to fend for himself because of his bad luck, which when contrasted by how willing Sonic is to help Larry out and find him a new home, makes her feel pretty cold. This early in the comic, moments like that often left a bad first impression of her character as someone needlessly stubborn and vain, especially since those were the few times the writers chose to make her stand out as more than a background gag. However, as the comic went on, she improved, and I felt myself warming up to her and caring more about her struggles. Sally works best for me when she's bouncing off Sonic, or when her responsibilities as a leader conflict with her personal desires, yet she pushes forward without a second thought, standing strong and committing to tough decisions. Sometimes she can even look pretty cool when the right artist is on the job. Sadly though, the comic focused on these traits pretty sparingly, and as such, Sally's characterization started to settle into the sad princess or the competent one. A character who doesn't want help and needs only rely on herself for emotional support. Unfortunately for me though, it was her moments of vulnerability that made her kinda likable and endearing. So yeah, with the comic not having much in the way of that, I felt pretty disconnected from Sally at this point. And that seems to be a problem that the Princess Sally miniseries was meant to solve.
Sally was going to encounter her mother. We were going to make the mother the villain. Sega thought that was too dark, so Sally and Bunnie Rabbit took a road trip. Sega said nope. So then they came back and they asked us, how about all we can use is Sally and all we can use is Robotnik? Everything else has to be original.
So, okay, no mother-daughter drama, no road trip with a friend. What do we have instead? Well, on the surface, the plot is simple. Sally trains a new group of freedom fighters and they eventually destroy one of Robotnik's bases. But here's the thing. Sally isn't actually Sally for over half of this miniseries. Now, this is one of Robotnik's robot doubles, and she's just pretending to lead. In the end, it's revealed that the real Sally purposely let herself be captured so that the team could figure out what the fake Sally's plan was. After they learn that, one of her teammates goes along with this deal with Robotnik where he's to swap the two Sallys, but he's actually putting the fake Sally back into the roboticizer and freeing the real one without Robotnik knowing. As such, together they're able to catch Dr. Robotnik by surprise at a critical moment, when his robotic Sally blows up from being roboticized, leading to Sally and her team destroying the Doctor's base and ruining his plans to make any more robot doubles in the near future. All in all, these issues are primarily focused on this twist. And while I really can appreciate the thought that went into this, with the fake and real Sally having slightly different colored jackets or different ways each of them refer to... Sorry, I thought I smelled something. Anyway, it's far more important for me at this point to get character-focused conflicts around Sally since she's still being properly defined. So having a twist based around removing her from her own story for a bulk of the time in some misplaced attempt to show that Sally is a good leader, I guess? Yeah, it doesn't do much for me or for her character, and I'm not a fan of, Seriously, what is that? Sorry, my point is that this is how Sally is often treated, moving the plot along, but not doing so in a way that endears me to her. She's competent, sure, but she doesn't feel like a character anymore. She's just the leader, and that's that. At that point, it really makes me wonder what Sally's personality even is. Okay, what is that smell? Oh, it's you. All right, so I'm not a fan of this guy, Jeffrey St. John. He's properly introduced in the Sally miniseries, eventually shows up in the mainline comic book as well, and is a character who somehow, from the moment he appears in an issue, manages to make it worse. And that's because he's always used to bring out the ugly side of the cast. He and other male characters consistently butt heads in unfunny ways, where even if there is a common enemy or a good reason to work together, they won't stop acting like children. As you'd expect, this is incredibly obnoxious, with the worst being his interactions with Sonic. When this goes on, Sonic's usual cleverness fades away, replaced by some typical angry dude energy. Where Knuckles and Sonic's battles were usually comical misunderstandings that ended with them finding common ground or having a newfound respect for one another, Jeffrey and Sonic's dynamic is dead serious. Two alpha males flexing at each other to impress their woman. However, in the Sally miniseries, where Sonic isn't even present, it's also a problem, because Jeffrey and this boring pig guy named Hamlin spend a lot of time fighting, to the point where their back and forth often feels like the real focus of the story, instead of the titular character who I'd like to know more about. And honestly, as you read more of the story and flip from page to page, you start to realize that that's what happened. This was never a Princess Sally miniseries, this was a Jeffrey St. John special, baby! That's right, Big Jeff is the secret main character. Because when you look at it, this whole story is structured around showing how competent and cool Jeffrey is, getting to see his secret rebel underground, and revealing that Hamlin shouldn't have jumped to conclusions and instead trusted Jeffrey in his leadership. After all, while Sally's away, it's Jeffrey who has to make sure the mission is a success. But, no, I'm not impressed, because the way Jeffrey really comes across is as an overly aggressive child. He embodies the most unlikable trait of Sonic, a need to one-up others or put them down, while sharing none of the kinder aspects of his character that are usually at the forefront. And all the while, the comic props Jeffrey up not only as a good dude, but a man, baby! And by the end of the Princess Sally miniseries, he's the one who gets the girl. Because, uh-oh, that's right, it's love triangle time! Woo! Yep, just when I was starting to get invested in Sonic and Sally's relationship, it's time to undermine that. Now Sally is able to fulfill her other role in the story as the grand prize of Sonic and Jeffrey's endless pissing contest. And I can't help but feel that Jeffrey should have been disqualified after trying to, I don't know, literally murder Sonic? And no, this isn't me over-exaggerating. Jeffrey, grown man, Saint Teenage Face Sucker John, attempts to murder Sonic. Why? Well, during the campfire issue, Sonic punched him for repeatedly claiming his uncle was a traitor. He's not, by the way. And so Jeffrey decided it was time for death. What could have been an interesting and tense conversation about trust between friends instead is about Jeffrey running in to yell at people for pages on end. And how does Sally respond to all this? Well, everyone has proved their loyalty and time will tell me if I'm wrong. Sally, what on Mobius are you talking about? Everyone here? Everyone? Jeffrey just tried to kill one of your best friends. What happened to putting the good of the group first? What happened to your affection for Sonic? Seriously, did Robotnik roboticize your brain? It's a shame that, in what seems like an attempt to lean into the appeal of Sally's character, the comic instead wound up using her to prop up someone who actively makes the series worse, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth and a foul stench in my nostrils going into the grand finale. So, after a whole lot of obnoxious fighting, that's that. The prologue to Endgame is complete, and now we need to see who exactly the big traitor is gonna be. And fortunately, a story can still be enjoyable without good setup. Like, sure, this was a bad issue, but come on! It's time for Robotnik versus Sonic, and Robotnik has always been great. Plus, as far as Sally is concerned, this is it, baby! It's time for her and Sonic to take back their home, to take back Sally's kingdom. It's a major conflict with an emotional connection attached. So really, I'm rooting for you, Sally. What could go wrong? The first issue of Endgame goes like this. Sonic and Sally are breaking into Robotropolis while the other freedom fighters watch on. It's revealed that Sally's father, King Max, has suddenly awakened from a coma of sorts, and he immediately starts accusing Sonic of being the traitor. Of course, Sally doesn't believe him, but things quickly change when in the middle of a mission, Sonic seemingly cuts her rope, causing Sally to fall to her... Oh, okay, yeah, that's... Wow. Anyway, while that's happening, Sonic is inside confronting Robotnik, so it can't be him who did it. Still, the rest of the Freedom Fighters don't know that, and so King Max sentences Sonic to life in prison for the murder of Princess Sally. Now, while most of you probably already know or would assume that Sally isn't actually dead, the fact that she's effectively gone for this entire arc is unfortunate, to say the least, especially after she got sidelined in her own miniseries. Needless to say, though, emotions are running high, with everyone crying and yelling and, oh Nelly, things aren't going well. Sonic is perhaps the most shocked of all, considering that he's done nothing wrong and is still getting a one-way ticket to the Devil's Gulag. And this premise is, well, aside from what it does to Sally, I kinda like it. It has some similarities to Mecha Madness, where Sonic was wrongly accused of betraying his team and had to go to clear his name. However, back then, Sally was there to give him the leeway he needed to prove his innocence. But now, with Sally gone, well, we immediately see how much worse Sonic's life is because he's lost the person in power who gave him the benefit of the doubt. Beyond that, Sonic has been isolated from his freedom-fighting friends, so it's clear that this will be his biggest challenge yet. But you might have noticed someone new to this equation. King Max. I've barely mentioned him before, but here he plays a pretty big role. So what gives? Why haven't I focused on him yet? Well, this is where the build-up to Endgame comes into play. See, the overarching goal of almost every issue leading to Endgame is the same. Find King Maximilian Acorn and restore his body back to normal. That's it. Sure, there will be an obstacle for each issue and complications in order to make it more fun, but that's the gist of it. Even Knuckles is here to help since he's such a swell guy. But there's a simple problem. I really don't care about this guy. Honestly, I'm not really sure why he's necessary. Before he came into the equation, Sally was already a fine enough leader. Meanwhile, Sonic and his friends were able to usually come out on top on their own, so what exactly were they lacking that only Max could provide? But that's a pretty cold, distant way to look at this, so what about on a personal level? I mean, this is Sally's dad. Maybe we're supposed to care about Sally and the desire to see a daughter reunite with her father. But again, there are some problems with this. First, we never get a single charming or emotional interaction between Sally and her father, flashback or otherwise. Second, as we've established, Sally is barely a character anymore and has lost most of her personality. Sure, she's sad about her dad being gone and determined to do something about it, but all she does is exposit. So what should be an emotional conflict ends up just feeling soulless. And that's the worst part of this. Since we've spent so much time focused on saving Max, we've diluted the heart and charm of the comic that made me want to see our heroes win in the first place. Next to no time is spent on how they feel anymore, because now all they care about is Max, and the hope that he'll somehow save the day for them, or at the very least be the final thing they need. And that's just not compelling to me. However, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? It's just one character. But even the most novice chef knows that changing one ingredient can ruin an entire meal. Like how removing chili from a chili dog leaves you with nothing but a simple wiener. Speaking of, Drago first appears in that campfire issue we went over, and his wolf pack is pretty suspicious of him because he's been wandering off a lot. And no, you didn't mishear and I didn't misspeak. This is his first appearance. This also isn't some red herring because Drago is going to be really important in Endgame. So despite apparently using all these issues for build-up, we have this character who pops out of nowhere and is suddenly super important because yes, Drago is actually the big bad traitor man we needed to be worried about. What? Why would I care about him being the traitor? I don't know this guy. But you know which guy I do know? Antoine. Or at least I thought I did. See, in issue 48, things have gotten bad for our heroes. Sonic has escaped capture and is now on the run from Jeffrey. Meanwhile, Robotnik has arrived in Knothole and is greeted by Max as their new warlord. Uh-oh. Thankfully, this guy pulls out a giant gun on him. It doesn't help, but hey dude, points for trying. Either way though, our freedom-fighting friends seem kinda screwed. But my man Antoine is on Drago's case, and he's going to spy on him since he's concerned about what's actually going on here. Great. So Antoine is going to be our connection to the Drago storyline and the reason for me to care about him being the traitor. Maybe this will be the time Antoine is able to cement himself as a hero too, with Drago as his antagonist. Also great. But here's the thing. This isn't Antoine. Not really anyway. because the moment-to-moment writing has completely removed everything that made Antoine Antoine. We don't see any worry or panic from him, no real concern or fear that they'll be caught, and those feelings were undoubtedly part of Antoine's personality. Without them, he's just been reduced to some guy. Some guy who's only here so the audience can listen in on Drago's scheme before shuffling him aside. And the same goes for Bunnie. But this doesn't come out of nowhere. Nah, this Antoine has been hanging around these parts ever since we finished Mecha Madness, and boy, oh boy, has he been annoying.
I was wondering what you were doing in here on such a nice day.
I am doing nothing that concerns you. Now, if you don't mind, I wish to be alone.
I can tell when I'm not wanted. Just wait till I get some stuff to work on.
Thank you for being so observant. Now, if you please, what was so special about this map that father had to hide it in the hilt of his sword? Both maps have one complete side. The ground and I must take someone part of the city. I shall do this on my own. That big-nosed little no-good map stealer. I have to tell others. This is the end for me. I am not going to make it. It's been a good life. No, I came here to save us, not ensure that we die. A shame I never find out what's at the under end of the map. Maybe someday.
This is more or less the version of Antoine we find back in Endgame. Sure, he does good things like stand up for his friends, but it's in the most generic, angry man way possible. Remember how Antoine was admirable because he rose to the occasion despite his fears or in order to prove his worth? The one who could have a huge ego, but when push came to shove, could also have a surprising consideration of others' feelings and tried his best to live up to his lofty impression of himself. Yeah, well, I hope you have a good memory because that's changed. Now it's revealed that Antoine was actually always a brave warrior and even saved Bunnie's life one time before the events of the comic or something. Then she gives him a smooch. Oh, okay. Seems familiar, but instead of Bunnie's affection for Antoine growing from his moments of courage that we've witnessed in the comic, now it's that she always knew he was brave, based on an event we're simply told about after the fact. Even his outfit takes on a grander meaning now, where Sonic pauses to tell everyone that, as a tribute to his father, Antoine wears his uniform. Sure. Thanks for letting me know that, Sonic. Overall, this section of the comic just seems so desperate to change the reader's perception of Antoine, but never does so in a way that feels earned or satisfying. Even if you disliked who he used to be, I really doubt this would do much for you. Somehow Antoine just turned into someone else. If anything, this is some version of Antoine we would see if Antoine himself wrote a comic when, I already loved you just the way you are, buddy. But Antoine isn't alone in being a bland, boring fellow, because, oh no, what did they do to my son?
Dad told me of that peak's fateful birthing. Our city's gleaming spires rose high into the sky. Our ambitions touched the stars themselves. Like lemmings, the populace fled out of the city, intent not on evacuation, but excavation.
Knuckles? Did you just finish up your advanced English course? What are you trying to prove, buddy? This isn't the Knuckles I loved. No, this is a prim and proper narrator with a penchant for flowery language. Writing like this pops up in a lot of his stories and eventually infests the rest of the comic. At a certain point, it's like the narrator just possesses the characters. Something's going down! Me too! Down to these bushes for cover, that is! Look at that! A giant tube dropping out of the clouds and it's inserted itself into the grotto! Yeah! It's vacuuming out the magic rings in the water! But to where? And why? And it just keeps going. Yeah, that's definitely not Tails Michael Prower. That's the narrator pretending to be Tails. This narrator speak gets really out of hand in this section of the comic, with everyone going on and on about every little thing in unnecessary detail. And I want to be clear that this isn't a complaint about tone, about needing the comic to either be funny or serious. I mean, some of you might recognize this line. For the first time in his life, Sonic truly understands the meaning of war. Now, many balk at this from the get-go. This sort of self-seriousness in my Sonic comic? But honestly, I like it. It's so ridiculous and the art is actually cool enough that I can't help but laugh, and frankly, I don't care if I'm laughing with the comic or at it or somewhere in between. Either way, self-serious stuff like this can get me giggling and definitely serves as a source of entertainment in the same way Mecha Madness would at certain points. But when taken as a whole, well, that's when things change, because this isn't just a little section here or there. This is the vast majority of the comic now. And since the narrator talks like this, and the characters often talk like the narrator, That means that we've lost the contrast between these likable characters and the over-the-top seriousness that made this entertaining for me. Even the most bland of characters have had the life sucked out of them.
Who, pray tell, would have flown the plane back?
Get out of here, guy. But you may have noticed another problem just from looking at the screen. The art. Similar to the writing, individual moments of this might not seem that bad. Actually, some are pretty dang funny in isolation. Really, out of context panels or skimming through an issue can lead to great results. But if you're actually trying to read the full comic, that's where it becomes a challenge. Take this page, for instance. First you read this panel, then this one, and then... which one? Well, my eye naturally moves down to this image of Sonic throwing sand, but that's actually incorrect. First, I'm supposed to look at the bottom left, but that's not where my eyes went at all. Then there's Sonic falling here. To me, it feels more natural to read it in this order, you know, like Sonic's getting lower on the page as he goes down. But no, that's also wrong. Instead, Sonic gets higher up on the page as he gets closer to the ground. Sure, I can pretty easily figure out the right order, but there's still a moment of hesitation, of questioning how I'm supposed to read, and that moment is enough to disrupt any flow the comic has going for it. Because when spots like this pop up enough, I'm left constantly doubting myself, pausing to see if I understood things right. And even when the layouts are fine, there's a good chance I'll have a metric buttload of speech bubbles to contend with. This makes even the best looking stories in this era, like issue 42, a chore to read because of how cluttered everything is. Mooney's expressive artwork creates a really fun and colorful battle between the freedom fighters and this other traitor guy named Sleuth Doggy Dog, who betrayed the resistance for T-Bone Steaks, which, you know, I get it. Anyway, Knuckles shows up to help, Sonic does this cool maneuver where he creates whirlwinds, and this is the kind of ridiculousness I signed up for. But this cluttered paneling combined with the overabundance of speech bubbles and text covering the pictures makes this issue genuinely tiring to get through. But oh baby, it's time. Because now we've reached the pit that is Sonic versus Knuckles Battle Royale. I want you to do me a favor and bask in it for a second. What is happening? Now imagine also trying to read the boring, self-indulgent dialogue while looking at these flat, garish colors, and at a point it all blurs together to create an unpleasant reading experience that kinda hurts. Well, this is the worst it gets. So many times I'd be reading an issue that had moments like this and I just have to skim over the dialogue or take breaks in order to get through it. All this is to say that much like with the dialogue and writing style, this isn't a problem that popped out of nowhere in Endgame. Now, the comic had been building to this ever since Mecha Madness, and honestly, hints of it were there before. And it really sucks that one of the comic's strongest attributes, the art, is now one of its most glaring flaws. Heck, eventually comic starts resorting to things like arrows to guide your eyes to the correct panel, which is basically like putting a band-aid on a gunshot. Shadow, what are you doing there? We haven't reached issue 90. Yeah! Actually, you know what? Thanks, man, just do it. Just get it over with. Yeah, I guess I forgot to describe what happens in issue 49. Well, Max is actually a robot doppelganger like the fake Sally from the Jeffrey special, and that's how Robotnik learned their location. Whoa. Meanwhile, Jeffrey keeps chasing Sonic, who calls Dulcie for help. Huh? Who's Dulcie, you ask? Oh, don't be silly, she's only appeared in 2 issues before the Endgame arc, where she's haphazardly dropped in because she's from the show. Either way, she's important, so you better be paying attention, Dragon Breath. Meanwhile, Antoine and Bunnie end up in the Down Under jail, where the Down Under freedom fighters are also being held there by Crocbot. Wait, Crocbot, why does that sound familiar? Oh yeah, last time we saw him, he was with Tails! Tails, where'd my little buddy go? Come on, where are you, Michael? Oh, there he is. He's not doing much, but he's there. Tails, the kid who refused to believe his hero could be defeated, and Sonic's endearing best buddy. He's given some shocked reactions, one tearful plea tucked into the side of a page, and then he just does nothing to contribute to the grand finale. You know, it's funny, Tails really didn't have much to say in issue 40 either when Sonic got arrested. But where that story was manic and silly, I feel like in a situation this serious, Tails should have a lot more to say. Guess not. But okay, this disappointment can't continue. No, we're moving on to the final part of Endgame, baby. The big confrontation. So put that juice on my jam, put those hassles on my La Vistas, and let's do it. And right away, it actually makes a good first impression with how it lays out all the creators' names. So many people were involved in this, and that alone makes this feel like an event, an all hands on deck kind of situation. And there are immediately some things to like in this issue. For example, Robotnik's backstory. The idea that this human faction, or Overlanders as they're called, were at war with the Mobians, and that Robotnik, seemingly a criminal of sorts, had to flee from his people and wound up joining the other side. Yeah, I'm down for that. It highlights Max's naivete with how he let Robotnik become their warlord, which allowed this menace to infiltrate their society and destroy it from within. My man's been betraying people for forever, even his own kind, and I love to see it. There are also some cool details here with how we learn that Sonic's Uncle Chuck was the one to save Robotnik's life, and yet Robotnik took advantage of that and every other kindness he received for his own selfish gain. Robotnik continues to make every scene he's in better. He's given the proper amount of focus, and yeah, as usual, he's a joy to watch throughout this entire arc. I mean, we get a scene of Robotnik murdering one of his own kind, and it's even someone he knows. Wow, my man even sleeps like a cool guy. All in all, I've said enough. He's just genuinely a highlight in the Endgame storyline. Meanwhile though, Sonic isn't doing so hot as he now contends with Jeffrey and an angry Rad Red who believes that Sonic did in fact murder Sally. After all, he always told her he was no good. Arr. Quite the predicament for our boy Sonic. Now even our good old buddy Knuckles doesn't believe him. How's he supposed to clear his name? Well, dear reader, do you remember Dulcie? That totally incredibly super duper important dragon? Well, it turns out that she is the key to this entire Sonic storyline. Because when Jeffrey, Knuckles, and Sonic are about to duke it out and it looks like Sonic will be captured once and for all, Dulcie opens her mouth and cries, "Enough! As you know, dragons cannot tell lies. That is why we can sense the purity of truth, and I know Sonic is not lying about being framed." And here's the thing, everyone believes her. I believe her, don't you? This is the conclusion and solution to 3 issues of Sonic getting arrested and chased around. But this is far from the only ridiculous plot point in Endgame. Now, I skimmed over it before, but the Snively vision is almost as insane. Oh, what's Snively vision? Well, remember how it looked like Sonic cut Sally's rope? What actually happened is that Drago tricked his girlfriend Hershey the cat, who's only introduced during Endgame, into wearing a Sonic outfit with special goggles that made her see everyone else as Snively. So she didn't know that was Sally. She thought she was offing Snively. It's just logic, elementary 2+2 kind of stuff. Do I need to explain how insane this is? Probably not, but I'm gonna take one from the Endgame handbook and explain it anyway. How in the actual blue spheres would Hershey not notice this? Did she only ever look at Sally when she was wearing this contraption? She didn't see multiple Snivelies? She didn't even wonder why she was wearing a full bodysuit. And that's without even going into how utterly unsatisfying it is for Sally Acorn to seemingly die and get kicked out of her own story by 2 brand new characters using a plot device that is dumb even for this comic. Now to be fair, Mecha Madness also ended with a Deus Ex Machina that saved Sonic's life. A contrivance, if you will. But the difference is that Mecha Madness was so absurd and over the top that it felt natural to end it in a similarly crazy way, with the added bonus of pulling from a past issue to make it feel like it at least had some setup. The story was also fun, so that helped. Absurdity and ridiculous antics have always been with the comic. It's that extra spice that smooths over a lot of things I could nitpick or complain about and makes it clear that the comic wants me to have fun and not sweat the details. But the sad reality of these issues is that, while it's still conceptually over the top, thanks to everything we've discussed, that absurdity is now annoying or bland or no longer acceptable. Before we were mainly telling jokes, and the serious stuff was just the side dish, so it was fine. But now, first and foremost, this is a serious story with serious narration and serious characters and serious things. And that means I need stuff to make sense, that I can get invested in the stakes of these stories, and that some random plot device dragon won't just fly in and make everything else pointless.
Don't see the dragon. She's a sad, unhappy gal.
Who?
She can sense the truth, but she won't help you take her putrid boyfriend down.
No.
Don't see the dragon, abandoned by her mother's
I'm home, Mom.
So what happens from here? Well, Antoine and Bunnie escape from the Down Under prison and they go to help Sonic destroy Robotnik's ultimate annihilator before it fires and destroys a knothole. Sounds important, right? Wrong, because they fail their mission. In the end, they place the bomb too late and the Ultimate Annihilator goes off anyway. Really, they're so ineffectual that the original version of this issue almost entirely cut their story, and you can barely tell it's missing. Meanwhile, Tails and this guy get 1 page of them escaping from Knothole. They get to rescue and help some randos in the background, and that's it for them. Aw, but Tails said to do it for Sally. Fight freedom, fight freedom. Yay. All of this solidifies what's been clear for a while now. Our heroes, the ones I've spent so much time with that I cared about, they don't matter. Nah, instead we've got Drago, traitor to the wolf pack and the bad boy heartthrob of Hershey, the kitty cat queen and bad girl supreme. This chick, the speaker of truth who keeps the plot running, and of course, Jeffrey St. John, the man's man in a man's war and a character who was definitely meant to spark something in a certain princess and definitely spark something in me, mate. These are our heroes, boys and girls, the key players, the real focus of this story, running right alongside Sonic the Hedgehog himself and actually in front of him. I guess I can include Sally too, since her being dead is pretty important, but that also means she's, dead, so she's truly been reduced to nothing more than a plot device. Heck, Hershey the freaking pussycat gets 3 whole pages dedicated to her getting revenge on Drago, crying about how she was used and how sorry she is, and why is she the one getting all this personal focus here? Who are you? Even when our heroes appear to be doing things throughout this arc, it all amounts to little more than busy work so that we can focus on the actual important characters that progress things. And we don't even get much out of these guys either. Hershey is probably the biggest exception to that. I mean, what's Jeffrey do when he finds out that he was wrong to try and capture Sonic? Oh, I'm sorry. Except he doesn't even say that stinky piece of crap. Everything in Endgame feels so distant. So impersonal. And because of that, none of this really matters to me anymore. In fact, nothing has actually mattered for a while now. You know, King Max, how his only role in the story is getting replaced by one of Robotnik's bots. Well, what happened to the real Max then? After all of these issues, they were spent on self-serious stories about bringing Max back, with the ways we went about doing that either being ill-defined at best, nonsensical at worst, and never accomplishing anything always. That's right. The goal of everything leading to Endgame was actually a farce. We did not restore Max and accomplish nothing right before Endgame just happens to happen. Which means the real Max is still in his crystallized form. Magic rings, magic emeralds, magic swords. It doesn't matter. Actually, magic swords. Magic swords, that's right. Wait. Oh, it's all gonna work out because God told Knuckles that he has to just kill Sorcerer Man Damocles. So he goes to do that, and this horseman shows up and saves Knuckles and murders some lady and then just leaves. Bye, horseman. And Knuckles is explaining what's happening, even though I can see it, and blah, blah, blah. He punched this guy under cloth, fake magic trick, but kind of funny. I like you, Knuckles. Like, bam! It only took 5 issues, but we got the Sword of Acorns. Now we can restore Max. Oh, but wait, I forgot. It doesn't matter because he loses the sword in the Battle Royale special to a mammoth with his ding-dong elk. Anything our heroes try is ultimately worthless by the time we reach Endgame. All those issues, all that exposition, all that suffering. Pointless. Oh, wait. Oh. This is cool. For a couple glorious pages, Robotnik and Sonic face off as this conflict finally returns to its core. An intense battle between our hero and villain. All these stupid characters are off to the side, the art has impact, the paneling is suitably chaotic but still readable. And the overbearing narration it's gone. In fact, its exit from the comic is shockingly exciting. Although conscious of their impending doom, at this point, both combatants feel they have nothing left to lose. After years of exchanging insults and vows of personal destruction, all is said and done. The only recourse left is it's nothing but a perfect Patrick Spaz spectacle. And then the last 2 pages, a sketch of Sonic and Robotnik wrapped in their final fight, the world seemingly melting around them as the Ultimate Annihilator explodes and they scream, and then it all goes white. It's brief, but here we see the potential of this more serious story. The potential of Endgame. If only it had refocused on the characters I was already invested in from the start. Either way, Sonic survives the White Void thanks to, surprisingly, Snively, who made sure the Ultimate Annihilator would only target Robotnik's biosignature when it exploded from the bomb Antoine placed, which... accidental consolation prize for Antoine and Bunnie, I guess? This means that when it hit Knothole, it didn't actually kill everyone, so yeah, Snively is the one who saved the day, who saved everyone. Sure. At a different point in the comic, I might have liked this. I like Snively after all, Robotnik is a legitimate threat, so maybe the heroes would need that inside help to truly get the edge necessary to win. I mean, we are hockey bros with him. Remember hockey? I remember hockey. But man, does this not hit the same when it's yet another example of everyone but the Freedom Fighters actually contributing to resolving their final fight? Speaking of, oh yeah, Sally's alive. She was okay because of Dr. Quack. Who's that? Well, he's the doctor who's been trying to help King Max, and his personality is that he's a doctor and he's kind of rude. He was responsible for keeping Sally alive, an integral part of Robotnik's plan. Keeping things running in the background. Woo! Thanks, Dr. Quack. Love you, bud. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Anyways, hooray! Sonic and Sally are reunited, Mobius is finally free, and so am I. But of course, I'm not actually free because the comic would go on well past this point, and it seems that despite thinking the series was going to end, the team wanted to plant seeds for future plot lines just in case. And you know what that means, since the comic has always been about Sonic and his friends fighting Robotnik, the status quo must return. And maybe that's for the best. My big complaint has been that the Freedom Fighters contribute nothing to stopping their bad guy, so maybe they'll do better in round 2. Okay then, let's do it. Roll the final page twist where it's revealed that Robotnik actually somehow miraculously survived. Where's Robotnik? Well, here's the thing. Robotnik is dead, which is quite the bold decision, I'd say. Now, of course, let's not be cute here. Obviously, Robotnik's gonna be brought back to life, I hear you say. This is a Sonic comic. And you'd be right, Robotnik does return. Just give it another, I don't know, 22 issues, not even including spin-offs. Just to be clear here, that means that Robotnik was absent from this comic from June 1997 to April 1999. It would be nearly 2 years before Sonic and Robotnik would once again face off in the pages of the official Sonic the Hedgehog comic book. Great balls of cholesterol. Wow. So how was this allowed to happen? Well, Ian Waffles, the guy from the first part of the video and my co-writer, managed to get a hold of the later head writer Ian Flynn, as well as the man who actually co-wrote Endgame, Ken Penders, to ask for clarification. Let's start with Mr. Penders since he was actually there at the time.
I was amazed, frankly, that it took Sega almost 2 years to notice he was no longer in the book.
And now we'll go with Flynn's thoughts.
The story I heard was that they got permission to kill off Robotnik for the anniversary with the intention of bringing him back at the next one, and they figured the franchise isn't going to last much longer, so we don't have to worry about that.
From what we can tell, it seems that Penders believes Sega was unaware that Robotnik was still dead, while Flynn thinks that they allowed for Robotnik to stay dead with the expectation that the comic wouldn't be around much longer, but a stipulation in place for an inevitable return. Though, as expressed, Flynn is not 100% certain. While this is purely speculation, it's possible that Penders' reference to Sega not noticing may line up with Flynn stating that they never expected the comic to last to the next milestone. So perhaps Sega made the concession, forgot about it, and then were shocked to see that the comic was still going strong without its main villain. Either way, both Penders and Flynn allude to one thing. Sega played very loose with the comic at this time, treating it as a superfluous side product they could pay little mind to the point that killing off their main antagonist for 2 years was acceptable. Which is why it's so strange to see the difference in how the death and eventually mandated resurrection of Sally Acorn was handled.
Regarding Sally, I believe that was more Justin getting cold feet about killing her off than Sega.
Sally still had some market presence at the time, and she did have a presence in Sega world, especially Australia. But yeah, they wanted her to live.
In this situation, I'm more inclined to go with Flynn's explanation of events, especially since Penders seems slightly less certain. Though perhaps the request to revive Sally had been given, but Justin Gabbry had the final say. Or maybe he was already planning to bring Sally back due to fan outcry before Sega demanded it. Once again, pure speculation. Either way, it really does seem like it was the right time, the right circumstances, that pushed Sega to pay a little more attention to this niche product and character and request that she stay alive, probably not wanting to jeopardize her potential marketability. Regardless, it's thanks to some third-party influence that Sally was allowed to live. And that's great. Sally would remain as one of the most important characters in Archie Sonic until its cancellation in 2017. If you've been in the online Sonic fandom for long, then out of all the Freedom Fighters, Sally is the one you've no doubt seen before. She has tons of fans and even her very own memorial webpage made in response to her death in Endgame, where fans could submit tributes to their favorite character. This is some early internet stuff I love learning about, and a link will be in the description if you're interested in paying your own respects. But needless to say, people cared about Sally, and given that the cartoon she originated from had ended, the comic had become the last place for her and the rest of the Freedom Fighters to be remembered. So it makes sense that fans at the time were even more upset about her demise, and I'm glad that, whether through their cries to bring her back or the love she had already imbued into new fans, she was allowed a second chance. But, dear walkers, it's wild to think that this could have just been the end of her. Like that. That Sally's last official appearance would have been her dying to an awful plot contrivance and playing the trophy for Sonic and Jeffrey. A completely unfitting end for one of Sonic's first friends, and arguably the deuteragonist of the show in which she originated. And yet, at least some of the writers were, entirely fine with that. But before we end this Endgame era, I do want to very briefly touch upon one story that I haven't covered yet. A story that does a better job than anything else at illustrating the massive divide between pre- and post-Mecha Madness Archie Sonic. And that story is... Sonic Quest came a number of issues before Endgame. The story is simple enough. King Max is still crystallized and the Freedom Fighters need to find a way to save him. Naturally, they want to try to use the power rings to help him, but Robotnik is stealing them and using their power to fortify his newest creation, the Death Egg. On the surface, Sonic Quest has the same problems as Endgame. A plot that mostly spins its wheels, cool ideas that are drowned out by bad ones, lengthy recap, exposition-heavy dialogue, characters all talking with the same flowery language, poor art, and... yeah, been there, done that. So then you might be wondering, okay, Professor Lowart, why'd you bring it up at all? First, not a professor. Second, I brought it up because honestly, I think Sonic Quest is even worse than Endgame. Because Sonic Quest is a 3-part continuous narrative written by none other than Mike Gallagher. That's right, the same guy who wrote the 3-part Mecha Madness story. This man had created my favorite story thus far, the exact type of thing I was hoping they would pull from in future issues. And yet this is the special to introduce that Tails scene we mentioned earlier, and boy, is it not the last. Honestly, I'd say this flavor of narrator speak is at its worst here. It feels like it's every other line. And even worse, it happens in the moments you would least want it. Also, man, what did they do to the Death Egg? The Death Egg! That's a fan service goldmine, even for me. The design when it first appears is really cool. It has these beady red sunken in eyes, and yet by the end of the story, its design degrades like the rest of the art, and I'm so exhausted from reading all of this that I almost forgot it was even the main thread of the arc in the first place. And I know Gallagher can tell fun, exciting stories, and that he will largely go back to that after this era is through, and yet he still made this. And that clear disparity in quality just makes the experience so much worse. I bring all this up to illustrate how I can't bring myself to point fingers at any one person and say that they're solely at fault for the comic's decline. All I can say for certain is that by now, the comic is falling apart at the seams, and I may not know why, but I do know one thing. It's sure disappointing. Earlier, I went on and on about how this comic made being a Sonic fan seem fun. Its excitement was infectious. Now though, sure there's still the fan art, the letters, the find your name pages, but it just feels like it's only there because it already was. I'm happy that Sonic is still pretty fun here and there, but really, it feels like the comic doesn't want to tell Sonic's story anymore. It wants to tell a serious, melodramatic, gritty war drama, and only use Sonic and his friends because that was what it had to use. And even then, it does as much as possible to push them to the side. The Archie Sonic comic is now far more concerned with presenting the events of a war, rather than getting to the heart of the lovable and plucky characters who lived through it. Something it was somehow better at doing when its primary goal was simply to make me laugh.
No more Robotnik. Too bad.
What? Too bad?
Hey, without a villain, what are heroes gonna do?
After Endgame, the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic found itself in a very strange place. Both of the shows it was created to promote had ended years ago, yet somehow, it was still going strong. But that meant that now, it needed to find a new direction. Considering the overall quality of Endgame, I didn't have high hopes for this material, but I was very intrigued. After all, the death of Robotnik was not only an end to the entire premise of the comic, but the main hook of the Sonic franchise itself. And that meant that now it needed to find an answer to an incredibly difficult question. How do you continue after a story ends? Well, that answer arrives in the Brave New World special. Despite having finally saved their home, our heroes are still sleeping in tents, there's no easy access to water, the city has lost all its power, and SWAT bots continue to silently roam the city, carrying out their duties as if Robotnik never left. Instead of excitement or joy, there's an eeriness to our heroes finally returning home. Except that this isn't really their home anymore, is it? I love this. I love that the comic doesn't just immediately rush headlong into some new conflict. No, instead it sits in this moment. Robotnik may be gone, but his presence and the after effects of his reign are still felt. While the Ultimate Annihilator may have done little in its own story, its destruction and subsequent release of energy provides some juicy setup for drama and conflict. For one thing, the very fabric of reality has shifted. Those weird little pocket dimensions or zones that Sonic once explored? Well, now they're seeping into this reality and drawing people into their weirdness. Even in death, Robotnik has left one more greasy stain on the entire planet. No, the entire universe. Second, and more importantly, when the Ultimate Annihilator went off, all of the roboticized Mobians, now dubbed Robians, who were in Robotropolis underwent a massive change. They regained their free will. But there's a problem. Reintegrating the Robians back into regular society is no easy feat. For one, some Mobians don't trust them. They're worried that they may still have some of Robotnik's programming left inside them, that they may cause problems. In the end, despite Sally's pleas to them that no matter how they look, they're still their families and friends, the Robians feel unwelcome. Heck, the fact that Robian is an in-universe term does enough to cement this idea all on its own. So these Robians go off, and they form their own colony back in Knothole. A cleverly cruel reversal of fate. They may no longer be under Robotnik's rule, but they will still be separate, unable to regain what they've lost. So our characters have a lot on their plates, and in order to even begin picking up the pieces, they're going to need to take on new roles. For Uncle Chuck, that means acting as a mediator between the Robians and the Mobians, a position that puts him under a great deal of scrutiny. After all, King Max believes that Uncle Chuck is a traitor, and so he commands Jeffrey to keep an eye on him. Here, it's also clear that there's still conflict within the Kingdom of Acorn itself, and even now, one of Sonic's loved ones is still the subject of major distrust. This results in a really cool scene where Chuck first goes to meet with the Robians to let them know that they're finally free. Robotnik has been defeated. Unfortunately, he also has to tell them that there's no hope for them to regain their original bodies. They can only be de-roboticized if it's through the original roboticizer, which was already destroyed. And even if it were fixed, any alterations could mean death upon de-robotization. We then hear from two new Robians, Sonic's parents, who tell Chuck that they think it's time to stop clinging to false hopes and power rings that don't last, implying that before now, they were using power rings to temporarily regain their free will just like Uncle Chuck had. But now it's finally time to stop simply hoping things will get better. It's time to take the one miracle they've been given and run with it. Another chance at life, even if it has to be spent in these mechanical bodies. And the other Robians agree. But for me, there's an additional implication to this line. It's like the writers are telling us, through Sonic's parents, that the Deus Ex Machinas are done. That where before magic objects could be used to wish their problems away, that just isn't the case anymore. They're in a different world now. Meanwhile, Sally's new role, along with her usual responsibilities as princess, is to be a puppet for her father. See, he's now the one giving the freedom fighters orders, even if he's working from the shadows. Of course, this means that Sally is losing control, which could already be hard enough, but to make matters worse, her father often won't explain himself and he prohibits her from sharing any information with her friends. Naturally, this impacts hers and Sonic's relationship. I mean, they finally had each other back, but now? Well, now Sally's too busy trying to rebuild and make this world safe. At times, Sonic can barely get an audience with her. and she's even brushing off her friend's concerns in service of the greater good. For example, when Rotor wants to finally go rescue his family, Sonic goes to argue on his behalf, fully believing that Sally will listen to him, but Sally refuses. With his technological abilities, Rotor is too valuable. They simply can't afford to let him leave. Really, this world is just more complex, and our heroes can no longer maintain their previous dynamics. Somehow, by liberating the world, the freedom fighters have lost much of the freedom they once had. From here, it just gets worse, because King Max is, well, he's a mess. He's only recently regained a bit of self-awareness and has been out of the Zone of Silence, that place we rescued him from in the lead up to Endgame, for at best a few months. Before, he was a king who led his people to doom by entrusting Robotnik, but now he's degraded further into an unstable, prideful man who decides to take charge and make decisions for a kingdom that has moved past him, and to make choices for those he doesn't understand, namely the Robians. See, after some time passes, a conflict occurs. A Mobian accuses a Robian of being a spy after catching her near one of Robotnik's old facilities, even though she was only there on a dare from her friends. The case is brought up to King Max, and what is our wise leader's carefully considered decision? Screw her. Just kill her. Everyone, including the accuser, is shocked. Even Jeffrey begs the king to rethink this decision, and you know things are bad when I agree with the Stinky Man. Still, Max doubles down. How about we kill all the Robians? Thankfully, no one is willing to go along with this, and Sally returns just in time to get things under control. So yeah, King Max is awful. His deteriorating mental state, combined with his hatred and arrogance, now makes him an internal threat to the kingdom and its people. However, the character who receives the most focus after Robotnik's death is none other than Sonic. What's his role going to be now that he's a hero with no villain? Well, first off, he's gonna have to deal with some baggage, like learning that his parents were alive this whole time. After all, though Uncle Chuck knew about this, he kept it a secret, and Sonic is understandably upset. However, his parents didn't want him to know that they were alive like this, and beyond that, Uncle Chuck was worried that such knowledge would only cloud Sonic's judgment. However, Sonic can't accept these secrets and starts to distance himself from his family. He just doesn't know how to handle all these changes. This, combined with a bit of a rift between him and Sally, leaves him in a position where, somehow, he might just be more lonely than he ever was during Robotnik's reign. That is, of course, except for Tails, who, despite some awkward dialogue here and there, gets a really sweet scene dedicated to showing just how much he and Sonic's relationship has grown, as Tails is the one to comfort Sonic, to be someone he can rely on, and for a time, he puts a smile back on the blue blur's face. So when Sonic is down, it's Tails who lifts him up, a fitting position for our favorite little guy. Eventually though, all of this change, it gets to be a bit much for Sonic, and he realizes that he isn't meant for this organized society. They've even put him on a council, for crying out loud. First, he tries to relate to Knuckles, believing that they both feel that shared desire for action and excitement, and that maybe they could do something together. But we get another reminder of how different Sonic is from most of his friends. Knuckles still has his own responsibilities. He has a place in this world, and he can't just take off. And man, it feels so good to see this comic no longer brushing aside its major characters. Sure, we haven't gone back to the silliness of the early comic. Stuff is still pretty serious, but there's actually some charm in the dialogue. We get a genuinely sweet reunion between Sonic and Knuckles that solidifies their brotherly bond, a little fun with Antoine, a cute moment or two with Sally and Sonic, which feels all the more impactful due to how much time they have spent apart. For the first time in a long while, the seriousness is being used to explore the main cast. And you know what? I'm glad this is being taken seriously. Sure, to some, this might feel too dark or melodramatic for a Sonic story, but I think it works well because each of these plot threads are natural extensions of the cruel and scary world Sonic lives in. Basically, the comic is properly building off of what came before, and some of these ideas, they're giving me a look at a fascinating new side of Sonic and this world he lives in. But okay, how is Sonic gonna deal with these new feelings, with this new world? Well, eventually he runs into his old babysitter Rosie, who tries to encourage him by saying that the only difference is the one you make. So if Sonic wants to make a difference, he needs to take action that will make his life ultimately feel useful again and fulfill himself. He can't just wish for it to be so or wait for the world to magically create a purpose for him. And Sonic runs with this advice, forgiving Uncle Chuck, understanding that while he disagrees with him, his uncle was only trying to make a positive difference in his nephew's life, and that it's worth it to make amends and move forward with the family he does have, even if there might be a speed bump here or there. All of this is really cool. The fallout of Robotnik, the Robian conflict, and Sonic's personal struggles. Really, it might sound strange at first, but I'm happy that the Sonic comic is slowing down. Now all that we need is for this to come to a head. Enter Ixis Naugus, the comic's new main antagonist and the one who will attempt to fill the void left by Dr. Robotnik. Right away, Naugus is able to distinguish himself from and connect to the Doctor in a way that makes him pretty compelling. Where Robotnik was originally the Acorn Kingdom's warlord, Naugus is the royal wizard. And where Robotnik was a technological force, Naugus is a magical one. This gives Sonic a new type of threat to go up against, and a seemingly endless bag of magical tricks for Sonic to counter. But the most intriguing aspect of Naugus' character has to be his relationship to King Max. See, when Max was trapped in the Zone of Silence, Naugus was there too, because an old colleague had thrown him in. There, he shielded Max from some of the Zone's maddening effects, but Max paid a price for that protection. He promised Naugus the Kingdom of Acorn itself if the wizard were to ever return home. So when Naugus finally escapes, of course he wants what's his, adding yet another problem for our heroes. Heck, Max even validates Naugus' claim to the throne. Thankfully though, Sally is there to say, yeah, no, and our heroes are able to push back the wizard for the time being. And this is where we get some really juicy stuff, because a few issues later, Naugus decides to take a different approach. If going head-on doesn't work, then he'll just claim his kingdom from the shadows. Really, all he has to do is take advantage of the growing tensions within Mobotropolis. By disguising himself as the Freedom Fighters, he reignites the king's anger and distrust toward the Robians. This leads to yet another order from Max to eliminate all the Robians, which makes him susceptible to Naugus' possession. As the moment Max succumbs to his hatred and prejudice, his body becomes ripe for the picking for someone just as cruel. What's super cool about this is how Naugus was only able to control Max because of the feelings Max truly had for the Robians. It gives Max a level of agency, while still making Naugus look pretty clever and really dangerous. In just a few hours, the kingdom is on fire, factions of Robians are hiding and launching sneak attacks on the military, and because Naugus is disguised as the Freedom Fighters, the Robians distrust our heroes too. Eventually, tensions between even Uncle Chuck and Sonic threaten to sever their newly restored bond, only for the two to show how far they've come in their trust for one another. They won't allow themselves to be separated again. In the end, Sonic defeats Naugus with the newly reclaimed Sword of Acorns, and the kingdom is saved. The king regains control of his body, and after this, Naugus flees the kingdom. But even though he's gone now, it seems that Naugus only made this already terrible situation worse. And that's true. For everyone except Sonic, that is. Let's hone in on this scene, that first encounter between Sonic and Naugus. In the issue preceding this, Sonic barely felt like himself. He was confused and upset about his parents returning after all. But when he faces Naugus, well, his quick thinking is back on full display, as he figures out that Naugus can only crystallize inorganic matter. Then he takes a risk, rushing right into danger to save the day. He insults Naugus, he calls for a timeout mid-fight. My boy's got his confidence back, his juice, his jam. He feels like himself, and for a moment, I felt like I had a fun version of Sonic back. And isn't that kind of perfect? Because that's the version of Sonic that he himself misses. Basically, Sonic is someone who needs a villain. Without that, it's hard for him to define himself. And Naugus is the one to fill that void in his life in a post-Robotnik world, allowing Sonic to finally realize what kind of difference he wants to make here. Because Sonic is leaving the kingdom, baby. He's going to fight evil abroad and kick all kinds of bad guy butt, starting with Naugus. And after enlisting his best buddy Tails to join him, the two head off. It's finally time to make a difference. It's time to go on a world adventure. So far, this all sounds pretty great, but here's the catch. Outside of the exploration of Sonic's character and a couple of standout scenes, a lot of this stuff is only really great in concept. Because the moment-to-moment execution of many of these issues and storylines can be, well, it can be rough at times. Cluttered pages, distractingly janky artwork, and far too much exposition from both characters and floating boxes alike. It's all still here, and it strains a lot of this material, with some of these stories feeling pretty rushed to boot. I mean, Snively was set up as a big threat at the end of issue 50, but he's taken care of immediately and tossed into jail in his first appearance. He then tries to find Naugus through these robots, fails, and that's it. Oops. Oh yeah, and Jeffrey's still alive.
Jeffrey St. John, whose own sense of justice will set the standard for that of the entire state.
There are also just stories that I have little interest in, like this booby-trapped metal one. This issue was supposed to be set up for when it would eventually be revealed that, while it looked like Sally survived Endgame, it was actually a robot Sally, and she gave Sonic this metal to trap him. Since that concept was scrapped though, this issue really doesn't work, but the comic just used the idea anyway with some sort of other justification. Don't care, made me sleepy. Then there's the weird detective noir style issue that takes place in a different zone to establish that the zones are breaking down, which is kinda neat in concept, but as a story, it's pretty bland. Of course, then there's Naugus himself. Though I like what he adds conceptually, he's a pretty mixed bag in execution. For one, he's just suddenly tossed into the comic with zero buildup. Jeffrey tells our heroes that they've sent a probe into the zone of silence, and then BAM! Out pops Naugus, and I'm supposed to care. Even if the heroes are confused too, guess they didn't watch Sad AM. That doesn't make this character's sudden importance feel any less jarring. Similarly, his powers in the Return of the King story are so ill-defined that, while the possession itself is cool, it makes the way the story plays out in response to it feel entirely random. Like there was no way to piece together what our heroes could do to fight back if Naugus can seemingly do anything, which makes the conflict feel kinda weightless, especially since all our heroes do to win is just happen to have a sword that can also do seemingly anything. Actually, the Return of the King special is just a mess in general. Like suddenly we're dealing with a civil war, then we're trying to wrap up the Uncle Chuck plot, only for him to get shot down. Don't worry, he's fine. But no time for that because now it's Sonic fighting Naugus. Then the King gets the Sword of Acorn and he's fixed, and at this point, restoring Max wasn't even on my mind since the last issues were spent fighting a demigod, but that's a tale for another time. And hey, earlier on, I was told that we were supposed to get some crown to find some sort of weird Hall of Limbo thing that I don't quite understand, and it was in King Max's mind all along. Sure, guess that's done then. Earlier, I said the comic was slowing down, and it has, but with so much going on, even the better concepts I've focused on, like Sonic's characterization or Sally's struggles, aren't quite given the proper room to breathe. It's crammed together with a bunch of rapid-fire ideas that made it so I could only really appreciate the good ones in hindsight, when I could think about the interconnected parts and retroactively weave them together in my head to create a more streamlined narrative. Like I would think back on a past scene and go, oh, that's what that was going for, that's cool. But when you read it, well, the cluttered paneling and the sometimes iffy artwork still distracts from the emotions of the scenes. And yet, regardless of my problems with these stories, they are, without a doubt, a sizable improvement over the Endgame era. There, I hated the presentation and most of the ideas. Here though, well, credit where it's due, when I did have a fuller perspective, Brave New World, issue 53 and issue 54 became genuinely enjoyable reads to me despite some wonky execution in the art and paneling. Which, if I'm being honest, when combined with how sincere some of these stories felt, it started to develop this sort of janky charm, like fuzzy Sega Saturn graphics. It's really hard to describe, but with something like issue 56, I'm having too much fun just looking at these absurd expressions and reading the silly dialogue to be too bothered. Though the narration has gotta go, man. Speaking of the art though, well, Sam Maxwell was the guy who drew Battle Royale, and he's improved a lot, which is obvious from this first Naugus and Sonic fight. His art is generally just a lot more readable, which makes it actually charming to look at sometimes. And of course, this section introduces Sonic's middle name being Maurice, and that Sonic is not actually his real name, which is dumb in the best way possible. Basically, there's quite a bit of ambition, charm, creativity, and heart here, even if I have to work harder than in the gag era to fully appreciate that. And overall, I just respect what the comic is trying to do now. Because this world adventure thing, it's such a cool idea. Now that we've delved into the political problems in Sonic's home, expanding the world and seeing how everyone else is doing is such a natural next step. There we can find new episodic conflicts to deal with, learn more about our heroes, maybe watch Tails grow some more, and you get the picture. The Sonic comic is starting to feel a whole lot bigger, and I'm excited to see where they'll go from here. And Sonic's goodbye is part of what gives me hope. Here, the presentation is solid, with Mawini back drawing once again. The dialogue is actually pretty darn good, with Sonic making up with his parents, telling him that he needs them, and that he wants to protect the world for their sake too. Then he and Sally share a brief but meaningful moment where they feel a lot closer than they have in a long time. He tells her how important a friend she is to him, and requests 3 things. 1, that she'll take his flowers. 2, that she'll get to know her dad a little better. And 3, that she won't go changing on him anytime soon. The characters and their relationships, they actually feel important. And as Sonic says later to all his friends, that couldn't be more true. There's something somehow whimsical to this scene. It manages to capture some of the early comics' lighthearted energy in a way that, at this point, feels suitably nostalgic. It's a pleasant send-off, ushering in a new era of the comic. A new beginning. Sonic's world adventure is a big deal. I mean, it's in this arc that the comic proudly adopts the tagline, the world's most way past cool comic. It seems that after lasting longer than anyone expected, the comic wants its intentions known. It's here to stay, and it's proud of all that it's accomplished. In terms of real-world time, the World Adventure arc lasted for nearly a year of the comic's month-to-month release schedule, allowing it to really commit to this concept and take us to a variety of locations to battle new baddies or old ones with a twist. Let's start with the weakest tale first, Outback Gut Check, which sees the return of the Down Under Freedom Fighters. Their material is uninteresting. Crocbot is just your basic baddie, and while the punchline of Sonic unplugging a raving Crocbot is funny, the build-up just isn't worth it. Sonic gets into some annoying pissing contest with other dudes for no reason other than that sometimes Sonic's just gotta be really obnoxious, I guess. And no amount of hilariously horrendous art can elevate dialogue this dull. There's also Barbie Koala hitting on Tails, and listen, I'm no expert on Moby and Age of Consent, but I am certain that Tails isn't of reasoning age yet. And that's it. Yeah, that's the worst of these one-off stories in the World Adventure arc. All these other episodic stories are fun. First off, there's this unexpected reintroduction of Vertical and Horizontal. Yeah, remember those guys from all the way back in the gag comic days? Well, they've returned, which might sound like a bit of a boring and weird thing to return to. They were just goofball characters after all. But boy, oh boy, the way they use them is absolutely bonkers. Here, Al and Cal give a long-winded explanation about what they've been up to, and normally I'd be annoyed by how verbose it is. But then you look at the content of their speech and you realize that, holy crap, Al and Cal are evil now? And not just like, oh man, this is a bad guy. They've absolutely lost their minds. After the Ultimate Annihilator decimated their zone, they came to blame one another for their home's destruction, and obsessively waged war against one another. In order to continue their battle, they possess Sonic and Tails' bodies, forcing them to fight. We get great lines like, prepare to be permanently horizontal in your casket, which, I mean, that's art right there. But of course, Sonic and Tails get through this with the power of friendship, and then they turn to Al and Cal to give them a rousing speech.
You two used to be great. I remember how you worked together when I was here last time. What happened?
Do not presume to lecture us, minuscule one.
As free-thinking individuals, we can presume anything we want, big shot.
And I'll tell you something else. You've got to stop fighting each other. If you can't be friends, then at least try to be neighbors.
Friends? Again?
Like it used to be?
Nah.
What? It didn't work. Naturally, Tails is kind of disturbed by what happened, but Sonic does not care at all. My man just wants a chili dog at this point. This is truly bizarre, but in a way I like. We take a typical children's lesson and flip it on its head, having it where love and friendship doesn't really win out, at least as far as the bad guys are concerned. Beyond that, Al and Cal's corruption serves to show how Robotnik's weapons of destruction have even touched fun-loving creatures like them, turning them into something I never could have predicted. This absolutely is not what I expected from the World Adventure, but I've got to say, it was a highlight for me due to how shocking it was, along with what it manages to communicate about the world, too. Following this, Sonic and Tails have a run-in with the Iron Queen, an evil sorceress who's using her magic powers to control Monkey Kong, a powerful cyborg simian. Now, Monkey Kong was introduced in an earlier issue, but all you need to know is this. He's basically this really angry guy who Robotnik forced to become a weapon and locked away in stasis until eventually the freedom fighters found him. He's as brash as he is violent, kinda dumb, and as you'd probably expect by now, he and Sonic butt heads. Though eventually he comes around and works together with our heroes. Neat. He also wants to grab a slice of that acorn cake. So here, Sonic and Tails end up battling to free Monkey Kong from the Iron Queen's clutches. And we have some more just, I'll just read it.
Tails, something mondo uncool is going on here.
Yeah, Sonic, a bloodthirsty lunatic is trying to murder us.
That's just it. Khan's a harmless psycho, not a murderer.
This line, it always gets a laugh out of me. It's all part of the comic leaning into its self-seriousness in a way that's funny, too. Like the characters seem almost aware that they're in this insane world, and I'm here for it. Then there's the janky art combined with the weird scenarios and dialogue. It comes together to create an experience that's certainly hard to forget. Plus, it's fun to see Monkey Kong just be our pal and have an adventure in this cool Chinese-inspired setting, fighting these weirdo villains like the Iron King and beating him with a magic fan.
No, I won't let you take my fan.
By the end, we get this cute joke about how Monkey Kong has this great prophecy about himself. Meanwhile, Sonic is once again upset that his comic is being taken over by side characters, but now it's silly and fun, especially since this time Sonic was, in fact, the hero. Later, Monkey Kong gets his own B-story to flesh out his little misadventures. It's nothing crazy, but it does a solid enough job of expanding the world. Next, we have the Jack Rabbit two-parter. This one is super compelling, because Jack is a freedom fighter who's trying to stomp out Robotnik's influence in his area. But at this stage, what does that even mean anymore? Well, it means that he wants to decimate every Robian using any means necessary, including keeping Sonic trapped here in Sandblast City as their permanent protector. And he is not going to take no for an answer. Here, we get a villain that breaks away from black and white moral constraints, becoming a character with an understandable motivation who just goes about it in all the wrong ways. And this doesn't end with some cheesy moment where Sonic convinces Jack that he's wrong. No. Sonic has to destroy their force field, leaving them open to assault from Robotnik's leftovers as he escapes with Tails. Basically, in order to get out of here, Sonic must betray a group of freedom fighters, which, wow, yeah, those guys are totally screwed now, aren't they? Again, the comic is willing to take these conflicts in directions I didn't expect, leaving me going, there's no way. Only to realize that, yes, there's absolutely a way, and this is it. To top it all off, this is the story that firmly cements the coolness of Archie Sonic's most famous catchphrase. I'm sure you all know what it is, so say it with me. Hasta la vista, mista. Yeah, baby. Woo! Finally, we have friendly rogues and foul villains, in which Sonic and Tails must save some Mobians from this roboticized general, along with some surprise help from our old pal Knuckles. This little adventure with Rad Red is just fun, with Sonic and Tails acting as these lighthearted heroes that wonderfully contrast the dire circumstances. You can tell they've done this song and dance before, and their confidence is infectious. Really, I'm impressed by how fun these stories have been. Sure, we haven't gotten much in the way of character growth for Sonic and Tails, but honestly, I'm just having fun with the boys, watching them get in and out of these wild scenarios. So far, the world adventure has been a good old time. Now then, let's talk about the rest of it. On their own, these stories were pretty darn enjoyable. But that's only if all I'm reading are the A stories. Unlike the Gag Arrow, where variety was the spice that kept everything fresh and exciting, now jumping from A stories to B stories to spin-offs has become... Well, let's go back to what we were just talking about. See, this story actually takes place after Knuckles the Echidna issues 10 and 11. Okay, so once the world adventure starts, we go to the Knuckles spin-off. No big deal, I like Knuckles. Yeah, I can read this, get to the conclusion with Sonic, and be on my way. But wait, now you have to read Knuckles issue 12, which continues the story further and even completes it. Something the comic does not make nearly clear enough to its readers. Oh yeah, and eventually you gotta read the super special since it came out around the same time, and yeah, you might see the problem here. Ever since the beginning, the Archie Sonic comic has tried to kickstart spin-offs, and eventually it found its success story in Knuckles the Echidna, as well as the Sonic Super Specials. Because of this, on quite a few occasions, these side stories, particularly those with Knuckles, become mandatory to have proper context for the main Sonic story. Like there's issue 56, where if you're reading the Sonic comic alone, you get plopped here with our heroes randomly on a rock in space. and the only explanation it has for those Sonic-only fans is this wall of text that still doesn't properly explain some things. This makes even the best parts of the World Adventure arc start to feel like a bit of a chore, as you're bouncing all around and constantly resetting your expectations. It doesn't help that some of these super specials contain completely random stories that have nothing to do with anything else that's going on, which adds to the overall feeling that the World Adventure is spinning its wheels. In fact, rather than exploring new ideas, we're really spending most of our time looking back at the past at the most inopportune moments. It's hard to get into a groove. Like 1 minute we're adventuring with Monkey Kong, the next we're getting stories about Sonic as a kid. 1 minute we're facing off against Naugus, the next we're dealing with Knuckles' family drama just so we can resolve a plot point set up in a B story that will be paid off at the end of the World Adventure. And I could go on. It without question kills the flow. And let's say you decide to ignore the reading order and save some of these stories for later. Well, since they're sometimes mandatory, that means there's a sense of confusion looming over your good time. Really, having a reading guide here is a must, because release order only makes this harder to follow. Shout out to Ian Waffles' reading guide, linked in the description. This pacing problem will persist far past this point too, so it's not like you're safe yet. Even worse though, these specials and spin-offs often lean into Archie Sonic's worst writing tendencies. Yeah, the long-winded speeches, the overbearing narration, problems with the art. It's all here, baby! So now even the funnier lengthy speeches in the World Adventure itself have gone from appealing to tiresome, since they're surrounded by so many more. Now these one-off adventures that don't develop our characters all that much feel kind of plotting, instead of fun and exciting, because it takes so long to actually get to anything when you're dealing with all this other material. And now each instance of janky art is exhausting instead of funny, because I'm also dealing with all these echidnas who all look so similar and I'm too stupid to tell what's going on, and man, this is frustrating. I won't dwell on the specifics of the Knuckles comic too much here, since that would be a 40-minute tangent that I'll get to later, but all you need to know now is that I have problems with it. However, all of this could be forgivable if I could simply skip the Knuckles comic. But I can't. I have to read it, because the comic has shown me that it's willing to leave me confused, that I need to engage with it, and that at times, the Sonic comic will even start to feel like a spin-off to the Knuckles one. And I'm sure many of you can instantly see the problem with needing to read issue after issue and page after page of text spoken about and by characters who all look like this, and then having to jump to a Sonic story that looks like this, doing so on repeat again and again with the occasional one that'll look better, but there's no guarantee. So at best, you just got hope. So yeah, this World Adventure can be fun in isolation, but it doesn't exist in isolation. Because of that, by the time Sonic and Tails escape from Jack, I was ready for them to go home. But you know what? This could possibly be redeemed. I mean, look, they found him! Ixis Naugus, the big bad, the guy who's gonna give me a solid conclusion to this World Adventure. So maybe this will be like the material that preceded it. Something that was hard to get into, but that I can return to later with a newfound appreciation and the benefit of hindsight. So okay, let's do it. But when we fight him, things don't go so well. Nah, he handily defeats our heroes and they're crushed beneath an avalanche. Fortunately for them though, a couple of saviors come to their rescue. Eddie the Yeti and Nate Morgan. On paper, Nate's backstory is really neat, because this guy was saved by the Mobians after being exiled by the Overlanders, eventually working with them to make artificial power rings as a clean form of energy. This led to the creation of the Lake of Rings and Nate being hailed as a hero. But then something changed. Naugus set Nate up and had him wrongfully blamed for an attack that led to the deaths of an entire battalion. Nate, feeling his presence was somehow responsible for this mess, exiled himself. He vowed to never again get involved with others, to stop trying to be a hero, and he's mostly held to that, except when he found and saved this robotic Yeti. Otherwise though, he's lived in isolation, alone with his mountain of power rings. Here we've taken an element of the world that I just accepted and tied it into the past, into these battles between Overlanders and Mobians, into a tale of a lonely man who is broken by a cruel world. It's super cool. Not to mention how it recontextualizes King Max's willingness to trust Robotnik, as Max knew Nate from the time he was a child. He'd trusted an Overlander who, when given mercy, gave back prosperity to his kingdom, and who he couldn't bring himself to punish when everything pointed to his betrayal. You get the sense that maybe he saw some of Nate in Robotnik, saw saving him as a way to make amends for letting Nate go. Speaking of, we find out that Robotnik is the one who got Nate exiled from the Overlanders in the first place by sabotaging his research. And it's fascinating to see that same man follow the same path of exile and mercy, but with a far darker outcome. The world of Mobius is a cruel and twisted place, and I kinda dig it. All in all, through this one character, we've expanded on the world in some really great ways. Except that, like so many things in this era, it's only cool when you admire it from a distance or in carefully paced out chunks. In fact, after enough time away from the comic, I'll sometimes convince myself these issues were enjoyable. But they aren't. Unlike Brave New World, it is impossible for me to find a new angle or perspective to enjoy this from when actually engaging with the material.
The lobed, oval-shaped object.
What? That's a ring! Just call it a ring! That's right. The narration is back, baby. It just can't be stopped. And because of it, the heart of the story is completely buried under mountains of text that make reading Nate's story exhausting. Not only that, but there's a pretty obvious issue with dumping all this lore on me. That being, who are you people? When my introduction to this character is walls of text, there's no way I'm gonna stay invested enough, let alone have the capacity to take all this information in. I came here for a fight, for a story, for drama, not a lecture. So actually, what about that fight? Well, despite the massive stakes of this battle, with Naugus attempting to steal all these power rings for himself, the writing, paneling, and just general feeling of the comic has somehow gotten worse.
Just how many rings have each of them used to bolster their own unique abilities? 50? 100? 1,000? And more importantly, what will the consequences of such actions ultimately be? The aged geophysician does not have long to wait before he receives the answer. The sinister fiend Ixis Naugus immediately begins inscribing arcane symbols into the very air around his being, while at the same time revealing his intent. With his newfound powers, he now toils to open the doorway to an alternate reality called the Zone of Silence. He had accidentally done so years ago, but when he was still Mobotropolis' royal wizard. Bored with great war between the Mobians and the Overlanders, Ixis left this plane of reality to explore another. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. We haven't even completed half a page yet, people. And there's 4 more left. This crap has the same effect as someone explaining a funny joke. You get it, right? It's funny because... No, stop. You're ruining the joke. It sucks, too, because the art here is actually pretty good. Starting with issue 62, the comic gains a new artist in Stephen Butler, whose artwork adds this gritty style to Sonic's dark and gloomy world that we haven't really seen since Spaz's work on Endgame and Mecha Madness. It's cool to look at these versions of the characters that have so much detail, for the backgrounds and paneling to have all this life again and energy, and yeah, well, I just love looking at it. Butler even picks up the role as the lead artist, and because of him, the comic finally starts to have a consistently enjoyable visual identity again. Just look at the detail on Naugus, the imposing stance, the magic energy seeping out of his eyes, his large hands big enough to palm Tails' head like a basketball. Yeah, that's right, Tails, you're the real Michael Jordan of the Freedom Fighters now, buddy. It sells Naugus as a dark presence. But then, you read the narration and it's all just... was this really necessary? But it's not just the narration. Nah, it's the plot too. Because the one who's responsible for Naugus' defeat isn't our powered up heroes. Our heroes who are rocking these brand new forms we've never seen before. Our heroes who came all this way just to fight this one guy. No, of course not. The true hero of this tale is none other than Nate Morgan. That's right. It happened again. Just like in Endgame, the comic has stolen the spotlight from our heroes to give it to some guy we just met, completely undermining our heroes' journeys. And I mean, I get the idea. This is Nate accepting that he needs to be a hero and all that, but it doesn't land when I've barely spent any time with him and when I've actually spent time getting invested in something else. Then Eddie dies by sacrificing himself to save Sonic and Tails, and it's the same problem. Don't get me wrong, Eddie seems like a fine guy, but I don't know him. Oh, and did I mention the way Nate defeats Naugus? Well, he uses a magic ring to wish him away. Let's go! Woo! Back home, things have been just as fun, because during this whole adventure, we've been getting B stories that are focused on Sally and her duty to her people. Along with that, we start to explore the heart of her character again, with Sally wanting to live a simple life. Except, haha, dummy, this is actually a King Max story, as he undermines his daughter's personal desires and leadership skills and is just generally being an awful dad. Then it's a Jeffrey story where we watch him build this new secret service so he can go on a covert mission for the king, and I just don't care. This comic seems incapable of just focusing on its core cast or good ideas, and at this point,
It's getting infuriating. Like, remember that general guy from earlier on in the World Adventure? Well, that's Antoine's dad. Later on, when Sonic returns home, he has to let his friend know that his father is an evil robot terrorizing innocent people. Ouch. How's Antoine gonna react? What's he gonna think? Well, shucks, I don't know, because we don't get to see it. Instead, the comic cuts to Bunnie telling us that Antoine looks upset. Yep, sure. Let's remove any chance of actually seeing, or better yet, caring about his reaction. Why not? And that's it. We'll just have to come back to this plot point in about 8 or 9 issues. Sorry, Antoine, we just don't have enough time for you because we have to move on to telling another story about Nate Morgan. Following this, we get Naugus' backstory, which reveals that Naugus is actually composed of these 3 separate sorcerers who attempted to harness the power of the sun for themselves. By all trying to selfishly take its strength, they held one another back, resulting in this strange turn of events. It's the sort of thing that could get me wondering what this means for Naugus as a character. I mean, what will having these 3 warring personalities inside him mean for his future as a major villain? But, I tricked ya. This is it. The big climax of the World Adventure. These writers are done with Naugus. We get this info about him as soon as they decide to toss him away, which, why bother showing me this now? All it did was make him a potentially interesting villain who's been reduced to a prop for some other character's development. Another cool source of conflict stolen away from Sonic and stolen away from me. But the epitome of this comes with issue 68. Surprise! Here Sonic and Tails have finally returned home with Nate Morgan in tow, and just in time for Sonic's 16th birthday. The whole issue is framed around this city-wide celebration, with Sonic laying low as to not ruin the surprise. However, a sudden meteor shower hits Mobotropolis and Sonic saves the day by rescuing a bunch of civilians. The perfect entrance for a crazy birthday party, as expected of Sonic the Hedgehog. Except, no, this party isn't for Sonic at all. It's for Sally's long-lost brother, Prince Elias. That was who the king had Jeffrey create a secret service to find. What a revelation! What an amazing reveal! I mean, I like Sonic and think he's cool or whatever, but I gotta agree with Max. This is way more important to focus on. The main comic doesn't even show us finding him either. Now you gotta read a spinoff for that, but like I said before, I'm starting to think the Sonic comic is the real spinoff. And as if to add insult to injury, the final page smash cuts to Sonic having his birthday party with his friends and family. Sonic thought he'd been forgotten about there, but don't worry, buddy. This is your story, my dude. You get your page in the world's most way past cool comic. But you can't fool me, because I know that this comic would much rather be anywhere else than at this obligatory birthday bash. During the World Adventure, it felt like both Sonic and the comic set out to find themselves. And though I can't say Sonic was able to, let alone poor Tails, it definitely feels like the comic has. It's decided that this comic isn't about Sonic and his world bolstering each other. It's about the world undermining him, about other characters becoming more important. The World Adventure's over. And what a disappointing end it was. Alright then, I give. The comic isn't about Sonic or his friends anymore. Maybe it's time for me to just accept that. And if I'm gonna accept that, that means that I need to give these other ideas a chance. Might as well give it a shot, right? So what or who is this comic about now? Well, first, there's Jeffrey St. John. Now, he has been less of a walking turd since he stopped making out with teenagers, I'll give him that. Yeah, after that little encounter in Brave New World, Jeffrey has completely lost his lust for Sally, and it's much appreciated. But unfortunately, he's still a jerk, constantly bickering with Sonic, bringing out the worst in others because he's just that insecure and kinda worthless. However, the comic does attempt to give him a purpose here, a role. He's gonna bring together a secret service consisting of that guy, Hershey the Cat, Blue Espio, and Heavy and Bomb. So yeah, maybe this will be the new Freedom Fighters, a new group of characters I can get invested in, even if Jeffrey's right there. But they aren't even given the chance to have proper personalities or a purpose themselves, because we only get 4 B stories with this group before they finally get to their big mission and do nothing. They are entirely inconsequential here, and the build-up for them ends up feeling the same way. And after this, the team's more or less done. Okay, so what else is there? Well, back in Sonic Live, there was a story where our boy Larry Lynx gathers up a bunch of side characters like Hamlin from the Jeffrey miniseries or this Eagle guy from someplace I can't remember anymore, and they save Sonic and Co. They're christened the Substitution Freedom Fighters. Oh, so this is our new freedom fighting group. Sure, what adventures are they gonna get up to? Wait, what? They're never used again? Guess no kid wrote in to see more of them. Oh, but here's an interesting idea. So in another set of B stories, Lupe and the wolf pack are heading back home and find some overlander children. Despite some members of the pack not wanting anything to do with them, Lupe decides to take them in because she would hope that others would show a similar kindness to their cubs if they were in the same position. Cool, so we might be building on the wars between the overlanders and the Mobians and going into some of the problems that arise from that, through showing this opportunity for connection and to break a cycle of hatred. Except that somehow isn't really the main focus by the end. Instead, this is ultimately framed as a general responsibility, and other Wolfpack members only push back on taking care of them because it's not their job and they're already too busy. That might not sound like a huge distinction, but I assure you, the story simply doesn't lean into the obvious interesting side of this. Like, there really isn't much distrust in the children due to them being overlanders, outside of this one guy. So the story ends up being far less related to the main story's concepts and themes than it initially appears. It's weird. And as for the two overlander girls here, Athena and Ariel, yeah, not getting much from them either as far as personality goes. Same goes for these new wolf people and Lupe too, actually. I just don't get it. All these new faces and teams, and yet the comic can't even be bothered to give them a good first impression. Remember when Naugus initially showed up? Well, he actually came with two minions named Uma and Kodos, and I didn't mention them because they did nothing of note during that fight before getting turned into crystals, hauled away, turned back to normal, only to then try to kill Nate Morgan, fail horrendously, and finally end up stealing Sonic's plane. Which, by the way, had the body of Crocbot in it from the World Adventure arc, which Sonic points out, but we forget to follow up on that. Speaking of dropped characters though, I wonder what happened to that giant panda-looking guy who we saw before with Naugus. I feel like he could have helped Naugus at some point. I mean, he seemed pretty strong, so you'd think Naugus would bring him, but yeah, we dropped him too. Oh, what the heck? Drago's back? The protagonist of Archie Drago's Endgame storyline? What you doing, buddy? Who are all your friends? Oh, right, this is the Fearsome Foursome from the Battle Royale special. Didn't mention them because, honestly, they didn't make much of an impression. At least not a good one. And, oh my gosh, is that Sleuth Doggy Dog? So yeah, we've been checking in with this ragtag team of villains for a while now. They've actually been getting plenty of focus in the main narrative and become this sort of looming threat. Not only that, but they're being led by Snively with this funny business about him falling into leadership by pure chance. And yeah, okay, yeah, I'm with you. Let's see where this goes. They've captured Nate Morgan and we're even able to get the jump on our heroes, so it seems like this is coming to a head. But, the very next issue, everyone but Snively, Kodos, and Uma gets arrested again. And not in some big fight, but in the background of 4 panels where they aren't even the focus. We've been building them up since issue 62. All right, this is getting stupid. I already had trouble accepting that the main characters weren't actually the main characters, but now, even when I do my best to accept these other characters, it's like this comic doesn't care about them either. The same goes for the conflicts here too. Like, remember the tensions between Robians and Mobians? Yeah, we never return to that. How about moments like this, where Mobians treat Nate Morgan poorly because he's an overlander? It could feed into the larger themes of the comic, you know, Robians versus Mobians, Mobians versus overlanders, but same thing here. There's no commitment. We don't come back to it. And because of that, it just feels flimsy. Really, we're throwing crap at the wall and seeing if anything magically sticks, but it's so cheap to me. I mean, if the comic itself can't even commit to these characters, why should I be expected to? And why did it even choose to change focus in the first place? All right, well, who else is there then? Wait, what's that sound? Is that something good? Something way past cool? Yeah, it actually kind of is, because this is Prince Elias Acorn. As mentioned before, Prince Elias was found during Stinkbutt's mission, who they procured along with Sally's mother, Queen Alicia. How these two went missing and all the details of the recovery isn't the focus right now because that's in the Knuckles comic. At the moment though, all you need to know about Alicia is what the comic clearly wants you to know. Thanks, Stephen Butler. And as for Elias, well, this man is the realest guy in this whole series, because Elias hates this comic. He spends nearly every moment on the page looking for a way out or begging someone to help him escape so he can go back to having fun adventures. Oh, my Aurora, preach! He's also the first character in a long time to actually get a solid scene with a genuine bit of heart to it. See, Elias feels alienated from his sister because, in all the chaos of his return and the announcement that he will become the new king, he hasn't had a chance to properly meet with her and just take in that he has a sister. So as a way to break the tension, he instead says what's on his heart to Nicole, asking her to tell Sally how he feels. It's a genuinely nice scene with some emotional subtext. Wow, I'm starting to feel better. Okay, what's next on... This comic is gonna kill me. Remember back in Endgame when Robotnik shot the Ultimate Annihilator into Knothole? While it didn't destroy it, it actually put the village 3 hours into the future. And I haven't mentioned this because it's meant nothing for 20 issues, but now it's time to resolve this plot point. That's not all though, since a satellite above Mobius has shot a beam into Knothole, and if the beam continues, the time displacement will shatter and the world will be destroyed. So now, with the power of the Super Emerald courtesy of Nate Morgan, Sonic must run around the planet a bunch of times, which will cause the beam to absorb into the Super Emerald instead, saving everyone. If that all sounds like gibberish, don't worry, because even I'm not sure what the plot actually is. Why? Well, that's simple. The issue is structured backwards. So what, you might say? Just read it from back to front then, idiot. Oh, okay. Let's try that, smarty pants. Starting on the last 2 pages, we get a spread of this satellite firing. However, the next page shows the satellite charging. So actually what you were supposed to do is start on the 3rd to last page, then read the final 2 pages, then jump to the 4th to last page. So it's not about individual pages, but sections, with each new section denoted by a blank minutes earlier box. Oh, okay, we've got this now. But, some pages also have backwards text. So unless you can read backwards, you better grab a mirror. This doesn't even account for the fact that we're still dealing with Archie Sonic here. So there's text everywhere. And yes, it's still really bad. But this is all assuming you even figured this out in the first place. Sure, I could tell the issue was being structured backwards, but it wasn't immediately clear that I was supposed to start from the final page because Sonic says that he'll explain how he got here. So it seemed like the comic wanted me to read it like normal and that it would be as simple as following the logic of the story to know where I'm at in the timeline. But did you hear the plot synopsis earlier? I still don't know what's happening. I'm too stupid. And heck, maybe that was the intended way to read it. I don't know. I don't know what the comic wants from me. Reading this issue felt like getting a frontal lobotomy, and I know because that's how I got this done. Every page is just another jab of the ice pick. And what was it all for? What did we accomplish? Well, this whole issue was just to explain how Sonic got green eyes and buckles on his shoes. And you know what? Maybe it's Sonic's turn. That's right, I'll do it. I'll kill you, Sonic. It's your turn to get crushed, Hog. Dear Aurora, Sally, I didn't see you there. Wait, no, Ken Penders killed you. You're supposed to be dead. Do I seem upset to you? If I do, I understand. But I've just run out of any good faith left in my bones. And I think there's a good chance you would too if you actually read issue after issue, experienced false start after false start, good idea after good idea getting butchered and ignored, and for what? For this? And why am I even reading it? All because some random guy on the internet told me to. Anyway, remember Rotor wanting to go see his parents and how he couldn't because he had important business? Yeah, turns out that important business was setting up TVs. I don't care if they imply he was doing something else. We don't see Rotor doing it. Or should I say, this guy. Holy cheese dust, is that the Cheeto Man? You know, who cares? I'm watching some TV. Thanks, this guy. Have fun finding your family or whatever.
K-Bot presents for the first and only time the illustrious biography of the world-renowned super scientist known to any nitwit with half a brain cell as Dr. Robotnik, the greatest overlander who ever lived.
Is it really time already? The comic has already spent nearly 2 years of its run on this. Wow, yeah, he's really back. He's back! To me, this is nothing short of the comic proving that it couldn't do it. It couldn't come up with new ideas, couldn't define itself in an interesting way, couldn't make me care, couldn't. When push came to shove, it just gave up and reset the status quo. I hate this idea, no matter how expected it was. Bringing back a dead character, especially after failing to do anything all that interesting in his absence. Come on. And when I say reset the status quo, I meant it. Robotnik's return forces our heroes to flee Mobotropolis and escape to Knothole Village, right back to where we started. Oh, and did I mention that the Robians all got captured by Robotnik and are under his control again? Great. Thanks for wasting my time. I want to make it clear that none of this vitriol is aimed at the creatives behind the comic. From what I could gather from my time speaking with Ken Penders, it seemed like things were constantly down to the wire, which resulted in a lot of miscommunication between writers and editors and no doubt loads of other problems. However, none of that changes the fact that as a piece of entertainment, all I could think by the end of this crap was, wow, I sure hate this comic. On a first read, this was all I could feel towards Robotnik's return: exhaustion and frustration. I'd been burned so many times that any nuances of his reappearance were lost on me. Sure, there were some cool ideas here, but what good would it do me to care? Give it a bit and inevitably each one would be wasted or discarded. But that's the real twist. Because with hindsight and full context of where the series goes, I can now not only appreciate this narrative decision for what it is, but can say that it's a genuine highlight of the entire comic. See, ever since issue 62, we've been getting updates on these mysterious satellites orbiting Mobius. There are 8 in total, and each time one is activated, something crazy happens on the planet below. Whether that be a meteor shower on Sonic's birthday or the laser beam for the Green Eye story. All of this culminates in issue 72. Here, King Max gives a speech to the Kingdom of Acorn, letting them know that while the road's been rough, he's proud and thankful for everyone's hard work in preserving peace and restoring the kingdom. We get shots of our heroes, Sonic at home with his family and other civilians actually being able to live normal lives. To Max, this is the start of a new golden age of peace. And then, while it's a bit wordy, this Robotnik biography is genuinely chilling. We learn about his childhood, his jealousy of his brother, his great intellect that gave him an even greater ego, and how when his country was thrown into war, they called upon him to create weapons of destruction to defeat their furry adversaries, until Robotnik's experiments had gone too far and he was forced to flee, leading to his rescue by the very people he would eventually enslave. Every step of Robotnik's life is painted from his perspective, with insults and cruel reminders toward his victims peppered throughout. And while all this is happening, our heroes are silent. All they can do is watch in horror as the program plays out. No one wants to believe this could be anything more than a cruel prank, but there's a real sense of unease as everyone tries to rationalize what they just saw. And the ending of this issue solidifies this, with Sonic telling his parents that from now on he's done pretending like they don't exist and is ready to be their son, to have a normal life with them. This culminates in Sonic giving his parents matching wedding bands for their anniversary, though in typical Sonic fashion they have to be magic ring bands, only the coolest for his family. However, thanks to Nicole, our heroes eventually discover the satellites, and something strange happens. Nicole tells the gang that the 8th and final satellite has just fired, right onto Knothole Village.
Hello? Is anybody here? Mom? Dad? Mom? Dad? Uncle Chuck? Mutsky? Come on, this isn't funny. This isn't funny.
It's absolutely insane how fast the comic improves during this section. It'd be one thing if it was just Robotnik that held up, but no, it's everyone. Sonic is going against the authority of Max and carving his own path in a way that makes him feel like a proactive and cool hero. Nate Morgan is actually really likable, providing his full support to Sonic's mission because he believes in him that much. Sally has some personality back in her, as she says with a smirk, "I'm going, Sonic, and that's my royal decree. You've already broken one given by my father, so don't push your luck." Heck, even Dulcie gets a moment to shine as she launches her heroes into space toward a confrontation with the big man himself. The art nails it here. There's so much scale to this encounter. The hits really hit. The expressions make Sonic's anger palpable. Everything looks so gritty, which lends this battle a more raw, visceral tilt. Stephen Butler is giving it his all and delivers one of the most richly dark Sonic stories to date, bolstered by the uncomfortable amounts of detail that he puts into these drawings. The biggest moment, though, when Robotnik is pushed into a stream of acid that disintegrates the flesh from his body, and as his skin boils and oozes down his face, a familiar metallic grin greets us. Robotnik. That's right, the same Robotnik who the old Doc met all the way back in issue 22 after he was seemingly destroyed by E.V.E. It seems our Robotnik's words of encouragement really stuck with his Robo counterpart. And after sending our Dimensions Doctor home, Robotnik found the power he needed by integrating his body with a piece of the giant Borg from issue 19, learning its location from his organic counterpart. And just like that, using its power, Robotnik would, well, I'll let him tell it.
I immediately set about devastating the face of that future Mobotropolis, including the royal family. I had eradicated my Sonic, while you had ridden yourself of your Robotnik. Thus, I traveled through time and space to fill the void left in both of our lives. The satellites were meant to test your prowess and lure you away from Mobotropolis.
Lure us away from home? Why do that?
Why?
From here, everything just goes to hell. Robotnik trots Sonic's family out like trophies. Snively frees our heroes because even he is against his robot uncle. The city is under attack, everyone's running and screaming, and Sonic has to race against the clock to save his family as the satellite prepares to self-destruct. Robotnik loves the struggle so much that he's even willing to just let them both die for the fun of it. Only to be revealed that, yes, just like how the Power Rings retained their free will before, Sonic's parents' wedding bands kept them from being brainwashed like the rest of the Robians, meaning that they can save their son and, wow, it's actually good. I'm feeling things? It's cool. As for Robotnik, well, his body perishes in the explosion, but he's accounted for this kind of thing before, hasn't he? In a secret sub-basement located 1/2 mile beneath the now abandoned corridors of the Castle Acorn, an assortment of robotic bodies lie dormant, each of them waiting to be filled with the spark of life. They actually did it? They took a trope I hate and this comic I hate, and they created something that's not only good, but maybe actually great. And a big part of that is that I lied to you earlier. Because aside from a brief reality-warping reappearance in a short gag story later on, the Dr. Robotnik we knew and loved is utterly, completely, permanently dead. And oh baby, the fact that Robotnik's return is directly tied back into our old Robotnik's encounter with him makes this twist even cooler, because it means that now there's this awesome through line, where despite the OG Robotnik being literally deceased, his will still lives on through another version of himself. His influence persisted in another dimension and other places our heroes have never seen, and through that, our old Robotnik in some small way is back to take what's his. It stops this moment from feeling as random as it probably should, because it all loops back into something we already saw and yet feels just as unexpected as it would to us as it does to our heroes. For something so small from our journey, something from so long ago, to become this important in such an effective way, it makes the comics world truly feel alive and interconnected. Time has passed, and now, for better or for worse, the past has come back to haunt us. Sure, there's still a bit too much dialogue here and there, and some of the minor details of this twist don't make perfect sense. Like these two Robotniks apparently being the same person despite having different backstories, which leads to this funny business about him being Robotnik Mach 2. But that doesn't really matter at all, because the heart's there, and the craziness and absurdity is back. I love that going forward, characters will switch between calling him Eggman or Robotnik, with the older generation usually sticking to the latter. It's such a great attention to detail, and shows that our heroes haven't forgotten the true terror of their adversary, even if they found a fun insult to ease the pain. I love how this twist parallels Sonic's feelings of aimlessness without having a proper villain, and morphs it into this deeply disturbing motivation for our new Robotnik. I love the payoff to Sonic wanting to be with his parents, how they were taken away from him the moment he wanted to finally be in their lives, only for his connection with them to actually save them all. I love that Robotnik actually feels like a new character. He's more bloodthirsty than the old one. It really feels like killing his Sonic changed him, like that taste of victory consumed his every thought, gave him a high that he couldn't find anywhere else, no matter how much 10W40 he guzzled down. He's this creature that can bend and contort his body in such unnatural ways. It's genuinely creepy to even look at this guy sometimes. While Robotnik may have felt like a monster, this Robotnik, or Dr. Eggman, acts more like a demon, literally possessing as many bodies and as many roles as it takes to fulfill his unquenchable desire for war and suffering, all while still keeping his comedic tinge through his newer and more bombastic design. This way, this plot beat isn't simply aesthetic. This Robotnik feels genuinely new and different, and that makes this feel more like an expansion than a reset button. Everything about this guy clicks, and just like before, he remains a consistent joy to watch in every single issue. I hope Tammy's proud. I know I sure am. But this isn't just about Eggman. This is about the whole comic falling into place around him. It's like Eggman is the scaffolding that lets the building stand strong. For example, Max. Most of the time I've found this guy unnecessarily frustrating and obnoxious, and yet suddenly he's kind of okay. Like he's helping out and respecting our freedom-fighting friends, reinstating the group, and broing it out with Sonic, since he respects his independent spirit. Plus, the heroes immediately have a concrete goal, where they need to stop Eggman from accessing the old Robotnik's files, which would include Knothole's location. This leads to some creative action, charming character interactions, and this surprisingly fun, uneasy alliance with Snively. And while our heroes do manage to stop Eggman from learning where Knothole is, he still represents a problem. Because though Sonic's parents have retained their free will due to the power rings, the other Robians are under Eggman's control, including Uncle Chuck. So now a more serious, thoughtful Sonic needs to deal with the grief of packing up Chuck's stuff, with the fact that he got his purpose back, but at what cost? It helps that Sonic is also just his charming, cocky self again. Take this little interaction after Max has knighted Sonic. At first, Bunnie and Antoine congratulate him, but then Sonic half-jokingly tells them to call him Sir Sonic. Tails cheers, Ant gets mildly annoyed, and Sally bemoans that she warned Dad this would happen. It might seem small, but these little interactions between characters, they're the reason I liked this comic in the first place and why it was fun. Heck, even Jeffrey is being a cool guy about it. Are you okay, dude? Am I okay? Wow, it's crazy to me how the moment Robotnik returns, the comic gets its act together. What these creators were able to do here is genuinely impressive, and that deserves to be celebrated. Sure, we've lost that really fascinating premise of a post-Robotnik world, which kinda sucks, but I'll take that if it means that these characters I enjoyed can find new life and new stories within this older framework. On the other hand, as I mentioned before, I couldn't appreciate this story decision when I first read it. The comic had lost all of my goodwill, and I'm sure that there are others who felt the same way, and how many of those people would have pushed forward, and then how many of them would have reread this. Yeah, the barrier for enjoyment here is, it's really high. But Eggman's gonna remain a consistent joy to read for the rest of the comic's run. My man is sticking around this time, and that right there is pretty darn promising. There's hope, and that makes me feel Y2K okay, baby, like issue 78 says. This is a new beginning. Again. Really though, am I ready to be that positive about this? I mean, I flipped and I flopped back and forth on this story going, well, this seems good and this seems bad. Over and over again, getting my hopes up about something that doesn't seem like it's ever going to pan out to be something great holistically. So, yeah, I mean, I promised a guy I'd read it, but is that really worth it? Maybe I should call him. Maybe I should tell him that. Ah!